Good morning, and welcome to the 2023 POA Budget Review. This is primarily a Finance Advisory Committee meeting and then subsequent recommendation to the board, but the board has typically, and as they will this year, also hold the review at the same time. And it's also for resident review as well. So if anybody has any questions as we go along, please step up to the mic and announce your name and ask your question or comment or whatever. Same as those that are watching the live stream online, please submit any questions you have, and we'll have somebody moderating that and be sure to get your questions answered. Today's meeting is scheduled from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and we also have tomorrow scheduled from 9 a.m. to noon if needed. So I know a lot of people are here because they're, quote, concerned about the potential increase in the assessment. That certainly will be addressed, and that always gets handled at the very end after we see what our costs are, what the rest of the budget looks like, and then that calculation then fits in. The way I'd like to start off today is to go around the tables up front here so everybody knows who everybody is, and then I'll turn it over to Brad Spiegel from the Finance Advisory Committee. So we'll start over here with Sue. And
Hi, I'm Sue English-Kovar. I'm on the POA board.
Marty Hewlett, Finance.
Carol DeStein, Finance.
Jeff McMillan, Finance.
I'm Marty Ancrott, POA board.
I'm Pat White, board member.
Brad Spiegel, I chair the Finance Advisory Committee.
Chet Pillsbury, hired hand.
That's true.
Mickey White, hired hand to the hired hand. I'm the Chief Financial Officer.
Jessica Johnson, accountant.
Steve Schneider, I'm on the board.
Rick Blau, board member.
Beth Kaburka, POA. Mitzi Lane, POA.
One other thing I wanted to bring up, all these handouts are posted on the web page, and Beth will tell everybody where it is just in case they're having any trouble finding it.
So on the POA website, under departments, on the finance page, there's an entire section dedicated to the 2023 budget process. This live stream will also be posted there. Also on the live stream in the chat, I have linked both documents.
All right, thank you. Okay, Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marty. Just kicking it off, I wanted to share with you kind of the process we've been through. It's unique this year. We obviously have Chet and Mickey both as new management team members who are working with us and going through our whole budgeting process the first time, as well as bringing some new perspective as to how things should look. I think just as Mickey will share with you the strategic initiatives, but as we got into this whole process, this is truly an unprecedented time that a lot of us haven't seen in, frankly, almost 40 years with inflation. Everything that we're seeing out there is wages are going up, fuel is going up, and when you think about running golf courses and maintaining a community, that's obviously a big factor. Chris's fertilizer bill went astronomical on him when you think about the golf courses and what's happening there. So we'll see a lot of cost pressure coming into the environment. This year we also really are absorbing a series of major investigations that were done, one being the reserve study. We found out that there's about $360 million of current replacement cost of existing reserves or of assets that we need to reserve for and take care of. Those are the existing things we have. 85% of that number is made up of water, sewer, and roads, things that we all think as property owners should just be there. But the fact is we do have all those assets and we have to take care of them. There's also been some comprehensive studies on what are the implications for both water and sewer, how the build out of the village and the use of irrigation in particular are impacting our water and sewer systems. And those were reflected in another set of large studies that were incorporated into all this. As the Finance Advisory Committee, one of our key challenges is to look at all of the big picture items that we're facing and make sure that we're making a recommendation to the board that is responsible from a fiduciary perspective of taking care of all the things that we jointly own together. And so that was kind of the overriding thing. We've been through a number of revisions with each of the departments so far in their budgets, trying to build them into a direction that meets that fiscal responsibility that we believe is out there. We're now seeing a version that frankly none of us have seen up until today as well. Should have all those inputs built in, and we will go through those together today with your opportunity to comment and ask questions on each of those items. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mickey, who will take you through some of the major strategic initiatives that are out there, and then we'll dig through this together. Thank you.
I just first wanted to touch on the strategic slide, and the specifics of using that term strategic means that we are looking at items that are absolutely, positively necessary. They're not fluff, they're not anything, but in many cases outside of Tenacity rebuild, they are new or replacement items. Tenacity rebuild is kind of the elephant in the room, and at risk of being Captain Obvious, we have to put that back. Kahiti Kitchen is something that we've been working on for a while. That was in last year's budget, and we've gotten some of that done. We're moving ahead. We hope to complete that by at least the middle of 2023 and have that completely moved over. Software, computer systems for the accounting system, we're using a 1998 computer software, and it is time that we update it. And the goal in updating this is to be able to pull data from all of our areas. That's the, pardon me, the kitchen area, the golf area, any of our financial needs from the water department as well, being able to move all that stuff into one system without it being manually data entered. And then the outcome of that, which is really kind of the key part or the icing on the cake of this process, is to be able to give all the homeowners a dashboard, for lack of a better term, where they can go and see everything that has to do with them, whether it's their assessments, whether it's their golf tab, whether it's their health and wellness center. All those things are in one spot that you can go and look at and know what you're at, instead of having to go to 3 or 4 different links that you are currently doing. The elevator at the yacht club here has been repaired and repaired and repaired, and it's now becoming really a life safety issue, because if it breaks down in the middle of events, there can be people who have to be manually carried back down because they have no way of navigating the steps. And so this year we have got to replace that elevator and get it completely functional. The last one, we've kind of put it as last because we're looking at that and going to make some decisions as we go, depending on how, as they've already pointed out, the cost of living keeps a moving target, and if it goes up significantly, we may hold on these, but otherwise we are planning to move ahead and expanding the parking at the Chota Rec Center, which has been a continual problem, I am told. Again, I'm new here, so I can't speak to that specifically, other than I just went through the early voting process, and that was pretty interesting to see people parked up and down the side of the road and double parked inside and everything else. So it's obvious that there is a need there. And of course, at the yacht club, if any of you have been here for any events, again, we're back to people parking up and down the road and everything else. So we would like to be able to expand those, and we'll see how that plans out. But I wanted to just hit on the strategic point of that is these are all things that are absolute. They aren't, gee, it would be nice, or this is kind of a fluff thing. They're really functional things that we need to get done within the system this year, this coming year.
I've been here a little bit less than a month, and so trying to come in the middle of a budget process for an entity this size and this complex has been a challenge. I want to make sure that I state that the board members and the advisory committee members have been a wealth of knowledge for me as I've tried to learn and to do this. So I give a lot of kudos to them as we go through this process. It's been very collaborative. I've tried to pull together the numbers, but they acted as your voice of reason to help trim a lot of the things out of the numbers and to put some emphasis on those things that are important. So a little bit of a heads up about how we came about some of this and some of their comments about it. Our goal in how we present it is going to try to be at a higher level. We'll present the consolidation in total. And then once we have a chance to go through that to see both from an operations perspective and a capital reserves perspective, then we'll drop down into the individual departments. And each of the department heads will have a chance to speak to their own numbers, the rate increases, and anything that's related to their ongoing efforts. Once we took the initial numbers when they came through, we went back to each of the divisional managers and asked them to start trimming, to cut back on as much cost as they could, to defer anything that they felt like was deferrable from a capital and a maintenance perspective that will allow us to go into this year and generate as much surplus as we can, because we know that there are several major projects that have to be funded, and trying to get caught up into that better state with our reserve balances. So we'll start with just a general revenue perspective. And this graphic tries to show what the total revenue is, what the total expenditures were, excluding depreciation. We haven't been as focused on the depreciation line right now, because until we get the capital improvements locked in and approved, those numbers are kind of a moving target. So, but this is the numbers that in the second column represent what the total expenditures are excluding depreciation. And lastly is that the column, it's the amount that is left over when all of the revenue and all the expenditures have been made. How much would we have available that could go into the reserve funds? And so you can see a little bit of the history there. And we're proposing a couple of options for this 2023. We know that the standard is a typical 5%, but inflation is over 8%, and the CPI index has made it up to 9.1%. And so we're going to present both of those numbers. And the only area that 9.1% is impacted is on your assessments. All of the other fee structures are typically around that 5%, at least at a starting point. We wanted to go in and give you an update about where the lots are sitting. So this is just a quick summary of from 2019 to where we think 2023 will go. The market is dramatically softer. There were about 300 sales in 22, but it was in prior years, but it was declining into this year. We don't expect there to be more than 60 going into 2023. And that's a pretty significant change, because it impacts the number of utility installations and other costs that are related to some of their public works numbers.
Just to be clear for these are lots the POA owns.
Correct.
So these are not individually owned lots that get sold. These are the lots the POA owns.
Correct. Thank you. We wanted to kind of give you a picture of where the debt for the POA stands. In 2020, there was a low of about $1 million from loans. There's an obligation from an accounting perspective to treat long-term leases as a capital asset and an offsetting loan, and that's what those last two line items there are. So in 2021, the CCI acquisition hit $3.97 million. And all of these are expected over to the right. There's an expected payoff date. So you can see there's a couple that will close out in a couple of years. And the Welcome Center is one of those that's, while we have a mortgage on those locations, we do get monies back on the commercial properties, and so those are helpful. So in a budget process, there's typically a general sense of assumptions that we've asked to make. And these were made before I got here, but it's pretty close to what most budgeting processes go through. How much in the way of revenue do you expect to increase? What are your expected increases on your expenses? And the leadership has tried to set some initial targets at 5%, and the cost at about between 3 and 5%. The volumes that change over time are based upon what the markets and what the efforts of the individual divisions are managing. They're the ones that have the pulse of what's happening in their own markets, and so we'll let them speak to those. And lastly, we try to keep our head count pretty close. And if there are reasons to add staffing, we're going to ask pretty tough questions about why you need it, what's going to be the economic benefit, what are the cost savings that might be involved with those things. And there's a few that we're going to ask for within this numbers. So this is a quick summary of where your salaries and wages are hitting for 2023. 7.2 million, not including any overtime or incentives, but these are the base pays. And you can see to the right there the changes over time where we've had the net change from 22 to 23. We'll hopefully be able to provide that information to you. To provide some additional assurity that the numbers here make sense and that they are accurate and they're trending correctly, these next two slides I know are very busy and you probably can't read them on the screen, but they're provided to try to give you an assurance that we know where the head counts were on each pay period starting from January 21 leading up through September of 2022. So there haven't been material changes. There has been some open positions and some ups and downs about when those are filled or how they're filled, but there hasn't been a substantial change in headcount. There have been some changes in some of the wage rates. We were in a difficult market, and we had a fairly high turnover ratio, and so the board had authorized some increases, which did increase some of the salary numbers, and we'll see them as we go through it. But from a headcount perspective, it's pretty flat over the last 2 years. So this slide is a consolidation of all the groups, all the divisions, all expenditures, all revenue sources, looking from 2020, 2021 actuals. We included the 2022 budget, and for 2022 forecast, this is where we think we're going to end up the year. We end up slightly over on the revenue side and substantially over at the bottom line. So you can see there were some changes throughout the year and 3.4 million for 2022. Now of that 3.4 million, if we add back in this depreciation number, it gets us to a number that we're trying to make the targets for where we see us going in the future. So the net income adding back the depreciation gives us what we're terming either a surplus or a subsidy. And not all of the groups, golf, recreation, public works, docks, end up with a net surplus. And so you as property owners determine the level of what you're willing to subsidize and an ongoing subsidy. What we want to do as leadership is to flatten out those subsidies, hit a minimum, allow them to stay constant, which allows for any increases in our assessments to then add to that base that's going to go into the reserves. So it's a very focused idea within each group. We've asked them to go back in once they had their budgets to trim it down to hit a better target. And most of the managers have been very good in trying to go back and do that, and we've seen some pretty significant changes. So your department heads have been very active, very forward-thinking in what they're trying to do, and very compliant in what we're trying to accomplish here.
Mickey, you may want to highlight this is not an income statement because you have now instituted a fund accounting, so your maintenance costs are not in this P&L as shown. They come out of your reserve funds.
Correct. So what Steve's alluding to is that we, as a /profit nonprofit group, need to manage our funds in separate ways. There are certain operational costs that will be reported in this budget, but there are other costs, both from a capital nature and a recurring maintenance. When we start talking about long-term maintenance requirements, we try to identify those that are going to be not operational, but are a major recurring nature that we want to anticipate. So he's correct. This isn't technically an income statement. It's a fund statement. So these are the funds that are going to be generated from operations. And then later we'll present to you a reserve schedule that will show this 7.3 million that we hope from a 9.1%, or either the 6.8%, that will go into this fund, and then we will use to offset the capital and maintenance costs that were there. So when we report to the IRS and all of those aspects, any of the maintenance that will be there will be included. But what we're trying to get at here, from an internal reporting perspective, is just what it takes to run the business from a normal and ordinary perspective, and then we'll try to capture those things that are non-ordinary and manage those on a very specific basis. Each of the items that were on the reserve schedule will be now titled with a project ID, and as the expenditures go out, we will accumulate all of the costs that are related to each, and we can report back whether we've succeeded or if there are complications to it, and if there are complications where the expenditures are higher, we'll investigate and know why it happened, justified or not. We'll make sure that we understand those things. Allows us a better sense of control, that if you put them into the operations, they have a tendency just to get flushed through, and if there's excesses, you don't see those numbers. So it gives us a lot better perspective on how to manage both your capital and your reserve maintenance. So this is a summary of what the reserve schedule will be. So later on, we'll go into those in detail. But this is each of the departments, their reserve excess or their subsidy that's going to be generated. And then from that, we have identified certain capital expenditures that they have requested to make, including this strategic items. Bulk of that is two major, Tanasi and the sewer system rebuild, and we'll cover those in detail as we get to it. And then there's some maintenance that we've asked them to go through. And here's where I think that the better part of the manager's efforts have happened. They've gone through and tried to identify items that they could push into the future periods that were not going to impact long-term development or operational perspectives. And so they've been very good, and you can see there's very little scheduled at most of the groups from a long-term maintenance perspective. So at a 5% level of assessments with the capital request and the maintenance of requests, it says that we will technically spend more out of our reserve funds than what we would have going into the reserve funds. And that brings us to the next slide, which is at this higher 9.1 level on the assessment. It generates another $524,000 that again all goes into this reserve, and it's the same expenditures that are expected, and it still shows that at the end of this year we will expend $299,000 more than what we'd have go into that fund. Now there's some unusual items this year with Tanasi and with other things that are happening, and there are some additional insurance funds and some grants that we have that will come in, and so when we talk in detail about the reserves, we'll be able to touch on those as well.
What's in the decks printed, Mickey, doesn't match your screen.
I will try to fix some of that. Sorry, I did correct these three slides, so your decks won't match to that. As I've gone through this and trying to work from home last week, I realized that slides 11, 12, and 13 don't quite match up to what I have presented here.
But all the numbers are the same? No?
Some of the amounts that came in from the reserve, this first column, did not tie back, and so I have corrected that. So
Okay, great.
These are correct, and it's, I don't know what's on the deck. It's off by,
Page 10 should match these slides, and I believe they do. You
Yeah.
flip back one slide. So yes,
yeah, these amounts here, 6.8 and 7.3 are the corrected amounts?
10 is the present roll-on.
Correct.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. I should have mentioned it up front, but last-minute review, I found a hiccup, so please forgive me with that. I did ask Beth to post the current one online, so the corrected version should be there available to anybody that wants to see it, so.
And Mickey, you need to tick and tie your capital maintenance carry forward from page 10, because it does not match.
Okay. I apologize for that. We'll try to iron those things out. This is a summary of what the reserve funding is going to look like. We've hidden most of the lines, so all of these use of funds, there are a list of items of capital and maintenance natures that will make up to that. But we wanted you to be able to see what this looks like at a summary level. So going into 2023, we expect there to be approximately $17.3 million in the reserve funds, and there's several funds that are out there. We received $2.2 million in funds from the Tanasi Fire. We expect to get an additional $2.4 million from the insurance in 2023 for a total of $4.6. There's a major sewer project that's within the use schedules that we'll go through. It's about $3.6 million, but there's a grant that we've been able to apply for of $2.1 million that we expect to offset some of those funds. Those probably will be received in 2024. And then we expect to better manage some of the earning power of these funds, and so we expect right now to start off with about a 3% earnings. As the economy improves and perhaps as inflation drops down, we'll see a slight decline in what we think we might be able to earn. That's that top line up there. We're making the assumption that each year the association will be able to provide 5% of what they have from the prior year, a 5% increase, and so that's where these numbers are showing this increase with an expected 5% year over year. It's a little bit nebulous. It's hard to predict what those were going to be, but this is the assumption that we've made for the future. I don't expect it to be dramatically different, but we're kind of in unusual times as far as where the markets are, where the inflation factors are going to hit, and what we'll be able to earn in the market. So that's it from a summary perspective. There's a lot to speak about there, a lot of good things that have happened. There's a lot of things that we have to be cautious about and try to manage down to a very tight level, and we're going to do that. Are there any questions before we go further?
So Mick,
Okay, thank you.
so Mickey, back on the prior slide. So I see here that based on this projection, you know, we're basically growing our reserve balance to, let's just jump clear to 2031, 43 million, right? 43.3 million.
If all of these stars align and we're able to adhere to what we have with the assumptions, that's correct.
So I guess a question I have as part of your assumptions, did we look at any projected capital spend over those years? Is that in this number? I mean, like, if we have a 10-year plan on capital?
Correct. So, as was mentioned earlier, most of your assets here are in sewer and water and roads. So we asked Clayton to go through with a couple of the studies that we have received and project out where we think the additional sewer costs are going to need, the water systems, and the roads. And so there's 3 line items, very specific, and you'll see them very, very high numbers in there, and we expect to spend those. And so we pulled those out, and so they are netted out of these numbers.
Chet asked me to comment just on the reserve study. If you haven't seen the results of the reserve study, I'd encourage you to pull up the prior board meeting. We did a presentation where we ran through the implications of the reserve study and laid that out. FAI, who is the expert firm we had in to go through those assets, as you'll recall, for those of you that did see it, said that we should, at this point in time, be putting away $8 to $10 million a year to take care of and maintain properly that $360 million of replacement assets. So if you look at the second line here, big numbers look like they're going in. If you listen to what the experts say we should be putting in, we're not quite there yet. We're making a great step forward towards it, but they're even saying over time it's going to be bigger numbers to take care of what we ultimately have in place today. So I think we're making steps forward and making progress towards it. It really will come down ultimately to a point where, you know, future decisions are, how much revenue are we going to generate from assessments and user fees? How much cost can we manage in running the organization? What are we going to continue to do that we have done traditionally, or what do we stop doing? And those are all questions that we as a community have to work through together and figure out how those are going to be there. But ultimately, you know, we're heading in the right direction, but these numbers aren't even as big as the experts say we should be putting away to maintain the village for the future.
So Brad, even though it's 8 to 10 million a year, is there a target number that we should have in reserves?
So there's a lot of different ways to do a reserve study. One of them is a percent funded analysis. And one of the beauties of our organization is we've got a lot of critical mass, AKA there's, you know, 6,800 of us that own lots and properties. And so through that, we asked them to do the reserve study based upon a cash flow projection. So we're not trying to hit some magic, I want to have 30% of the overall reserve target funded, which you might see if you'd had experience in a smaller condo association where you were dealing with a couple hundred properties instead of 6,800. So we're truly trying to manage each of the assets that are out there. What's the replacement curve cycle look like over a 30, 40, 50-year time horizon? And then correspondingly make sure that we're building up reserves. And by definition, the reserve balance is going to ebb and flow as we have a major project. So we're putting 8 to 10 a year in every year. There may be some year where there's, you know, extremely large expenditures if we have something major in the water or sewer system, and those are all timed out based upon what year was installed, what's its expected useful life, and when should we have to replace it. So as those phase through, and we'll have the opportunity to manage those, you know, we're not going to spend 0 in one year and 50 million in another year, but through time, we'll have the opportunity to manage those and balance those out so that we're taking care of what we have and going forward. So it's really built on a cash flow basis that when it's time to spend it, we have the money, not that we're trying to hit some magic percentage number or some magic number in the bank account.
More question on this slide. The very first column, 2023, if I go right above that number, it says percent contribution increase per year. And I see the subsequent years all at 5%, but this, in 2023, it says 16.2.
Yeah, and on here, it's higher, and that's misleading. I should have pulled that formula out, because this does, originally I had a figure that was flowing in from 2022, and I realized that it wasn't something that I could substantiate and speak to. So I dropped back to just providing the 17.3 million, so this figure, this contribution rate for this year should not be right.
So that's based on a contribution rate in 2023 of 9.1% to reserve, or in assessments, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I'm sorry.
Mickey, another add-on piggyback on what Marty said. If you look at 28 through 31 capital spend, realizing 85% of your spend is water, sewer, and roads, we're still going to have a bare minimum sustaining capital. And I find it hard to believe that we'll be back down to $600,000 a year in capital in the out years. So we need to take a look at what sustaining capital probably should be, because what that does is it artificially inflates our reserve balances in the outer years to give us a warm, fuzzy feeling when in fact our capital, I believe, is way understated.
So Clayton did a good job in going through all of those out years, and as we go through this schedule that'll be expanded to show all of those lines, we'll have a chance to have some comment and discussions about each of those.
Cap Purvis, there's a couple of critical assumptions in here, and I've not heard those addressed at this moment. One of which is, what is your assumption on how much reserve we're trying to reach? I know we've seen the $360 million theoretical number to replace every single asset if we were to start from scratch with a green field and build the whole new village at that moment. What I've not heard is, are we trying to reach 5% of that number, 10% of that number, or whatever? Because to my mind, that's a critical assumption setting the future target. The second issue is we keep talking about those assets. Two-thirds, approximately 66% of those assets are tied up in one thing, water and sewer. Now, we're using the assessments to reach a target that affects, just theoretically should only affect 1/3 of those assets. The other 2/3, water and sewer, historically, have been covered through our individual residents' water and sewer bills. So any future growth of the reserve to affect 2/3 of that asset base should theoretically be applied to us residents and not to the non-residents. And I don't know if the board is making the assumption that now we're going to spread that over all property owners, or are we going to now say, and that's what a 9.1 increase in assessment would achieve, is you're now spreading it over all property owners, not just residents? Or are we going to stay with our historical billing on our water and sewer bills that each of us as residents do incur? And I don't know whether that assumption has been addressed yet. To me, it appears like it's built into all these numbers, but I don't know if the board has made that decision, or can they make that decision. I don't know what the legal scenario is when you have a water and sewer, basically utility, and now you're going to spread utility costs over all property owners. Thank you.
So, Cap, let me address your first question. As I said, we're not trying to hit a magic reserve level balance. We're trying to make sure from a cash flow perspective each year, as the assets reach a particular useful life, that we're making sure that there is a cash reserve available for those at that point in time to replace them. And if you look at, as I say, smaller condo associations, and if you've been part of those, you'll hear people say, oh, we should be 30, 40, 50% funded on our reserve balances to make sure we're okay, and we're trying to mitigate a special assessment. We did not take that approach. We took a cash flow approach. So when is the cash required, and then we'll have it when we need it. And to your point on the water side of the equation, again, I'd ask you folks to look at last month's board meeting. We did make a recommendation on water rates going up. That is primarily to cover the cost of operating the system and paying for the increased rate structure that we saw from LUB and also from TAS, because we see water and sewer rates going up in those. That was addressed in that structure. Rough numbers, I think it represents 5,200 properties where there's a home on the property out of the 6,800 homes or 6,800 property owner lots out there. So those are kind of the rough numbers. 5,200 out of 6,800 would be to your other question as to how those would play out.
And Brad, to piggyback on that, there is a readiness to serve investment required for water, sewer, and roads, which should be paid by all property owners, whether they have a house or not. So you're absolutely correct, Cap. Back in the day, the only time we affected an assessment, if it related to water and sewer, it got charged directly to those who had a meter. But when you sit back and look at the major investments we have to make now, every property owner gains value by having improved water, sewer, and roads. So there is a level, and I can't tell you what that number is, but you have to have readiness to serve. And that's why when you don't even take water and you still got your meter on, there's a minimum monthly bill. You have an investment, so when you show up and you want your water and sewer turned on, it's available. There is a readiness to serve investment required, and any city public utility will tell you when you do a water and sewer study, there is a base minimum readiness to serve charge. So is it a change from the past? I believe so. Do we have to cover these expenses and investments? Absolutely.
So now we'll switch gears and we'll get into each of the divisions. We've asked the divisional managers to stand up. Chris is here to speak on behalf of golf, and we'll go through his slides.
Yeah, we'll try to get through this pretty quickly. But before I get started, just good morning, everybody. I have some thank yous to give out, hand out, as this has been a pretty awesome process. The collaboration through this whole process to get to where we are today has been outstanding. And in particular, I want to thank, the members of my team that are here and their efforts, the management team, specifically our accounting team, burning the candle at both ends for sure for some time now. My golf advisory committee, a lot of those folks are here. Appreciate your support. The finance committee, the board, the entire golf community, thank you. So just want to highlight a few of our core objectives as we enter this process, being to provide our members and guests with the best possible golf experience at a value, which ties into our mission statement there with world-class golf at a value. One of the things we're trying to tweak the model a little bit and do a better job of is to afford maximum member access to the tee sheets, as our business model has changed over the past 3 years plus as a result of COVID and obviously the influx of folks into the village. We also want to continue to strategically fill need periods and maximize yield. Continuous improvement is the name of the game when it comes to golf, in particular on the golf course maintenance side of things. We're getting some compounding interest there on good decisions and your support through the past few years, and always controlling expenses. So this is just an introductory high-level slide that pretty well covers everything that we'll get into a little more in detail here in a moment. But obviously golf's never been stronger, and the plan that we have in place for 2023 will enable us to continue to build off our momentum and continue to move golf forward. The operation, in essence, will remain the same. No addition in headcount. We're just trying to figure out creative ways to continue to provide the same level of service as we continue to strive to improve the overall golf experience each and every passing day. The projected increases in revenues will offset the historic inflation rates we're managing. So at a high level, the golf rates, the daily member rates will be going up an average of 5%, which is in line with the peer clubs in our regions. The daily guest rates will be going up a minimum of 8%. Daily range of individual baskets will be going up from $6 to $7. Our memberships, the break-even rounds for our individual two-person memberships are staying the same. But when that flows through with your 5% and the increase in the driving range, that equates to about a 10% price increase on the membership with your individual two-person household. And your Twilight membership is going up a break-even of 5 per 18-hole round, including cart, as most of those folks take advantage of one of our cart options. So the next controllable from a revenue perspective are the golf rounds. The budget rounds are going up about 12% from $85,982 to $96,000. Our initial presentation, we were going to $90,000, so we revamped things to get to $96,000, which enables us to hit our net income and subsidy target. So that's just shy of our record totals. The budgeted member rounds were going to be $85,000, which is directly in line with what we're going to experience and forecasting for 2022. And our guest rounds are set at $11,000 to better accommodate our member demand. The other piece of that we'll go into a little more detail in a minute is the mix, and that's based off what we've been experiencing historically the last 3 years as things have changed, in particular what we've experienced here in 2022. So a big thing, one of our strategic initiatives and something we had to revamp and take in consideration, obviously, is what's all going on at Tenacity. Kudos and thank you to all your support, in particular our Public Works Department, Clayton Taylor, sitting back there. We couldn't continue to operate as we have without everybody's help. The volunteers that have come out to help us with our cart logistics and mobilization. I know Pat White's been there most every morning. I've only had to write him up a few times for not wearing proper attire, but we appreciate you. We appreciate you. No, it's been unbelievable showing by the entire community, the golf community, just to keep us operational there, and some changes are coming here shortly. The cart barn, temporary cart barn facility, the carport will be in place, put in that place on Monday and Tuesday. And shortly thereafter, we'll have the power installed to support our carts and remobilize and have them up top, which will be a game changer for operation. And we're working on really a nice temporary, long-term, short-term modular facility that we'll have in place in time for our next golf season. So again, thank you for all your support, patience, and understanding as we continue to navigate things with the Tenacity operations.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here?
Yep.
Okay. So based on our last conversation regarding rates, I went back and looked at golf guest round rates, and to update everybody on what my point was, if I go to look at the the positive net revenue generating amenity that we have, going up 3% on slip fees generates an additional $21,296.40 for 2023. Okay, so then if I go back and I take golf guest rounds, and then I take the 11,000 that you have in here, and I make a 50-50 split, guest with member, guest without member. Guest with members $31.50, guest without members $45.50. With my point being, charge all guests the same high fee, the 50-50 split generates $21,175 in additional revenue. But if the split is 70-30, or 60-40, and I'll cover both, 70-40, which was the information that I received from a number of people that is more guests with member than guests without member. So I split it 70-30, and that fee actually goes down. The increase then is only $19,635. But if I go with the 60-40 split, 60% guests with member and 40% guests without member, it goes up again to $20,405. Now my point is, again, I know what the board said, but I leaned over to Brad and said, I'm going to take my final shot and I'll live with it, whatever we decide. But the issue is, we've got property owners, 880 of them, that are going up 3% to generate $21,296, and we have non-villagers coming in here that could generate that much or slightly more. And we're not taking advantage of it. My point.
Well, just to rehash that again, we talked at length in the last meeting, and it came to a vote. But our position is that we wouldn't have the added revenue because more people will go off property off-site based off our benchmarking information and where we are positioned with our peer clubs in the area. But, moving on.
So before you do move on, I just have a question on the guest rounds. You said 11, you're budgeting 11,000.
Correct.
To better accommodate. So that's assuming, I guess the assumption there is that is fewer than the forecast for 2022.
That is correct, and we'll get into that detail here in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah. So moving on, Mickey. So this is after our first budget kickoff meeting with the Finance Advisory Committee, we went back and started to get into some of the inflation data and based off some of the recommendations and try to get a feel for, what is our target? What are we trying to overcome here in these historic times? It's not just a standard 3% we're plugging in across the board. Obviously, these are unique times, so we went through an inflation exercise, and it spit out, this is just real high level early on in the process, an increase at operating at the exact same capacity of about $400,000. So obviously, with the horticulture supplies going up 20% or so, I think gasoline was going to go up 50% over where we were in 22. In the 22 budgeting process, diesel was 130% opposed to where we were in the 22 budget process. So obviously we have a lot to overcome with respect to just the economy and inflation, everything we're living in, we're managing in the world today. So, Mickey. Rounds forecasting. Again, total guest rounds, we're forecasting this year at about 15,000. So we have a capacity issue, especially on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with respect to our member capacity, and we've had to displace some people, and we have a significant, far more overflow than we've had to manage historically. So what we've done is we've revamped the plan, and again, these things can be moving targets, and that's the beauty of our guest mix and makeup, is we can turn some of these off, and then we can turn them back on if need be. But we're trying to build our plan for 2023 to better accommodate our increase in member requests and more strategically position our guests. So that's how the plan is positioned. And does that answer your question, Marty? Okay, moving on. So this is the rounds budget forecast for 2023, and again, it's 85,000 for members, 11,000 for guests, 6,900 of those guests a member. As you mentioned, Pat, are guests a member, 6,900 of the 11,000, so, you know, roughly 60 to 70%, which is in line with what we've experienced historically as we continue to better position our guests and mix those folks in with our ongoing and upward moving member requests. All right, Mickey. This is just a slide, a little bit of a strain on the eyes here, but it gives you a feel for our mix. That's one of the other controllables, or uncontrollables, I guess, that, you know, dictates and leads to our revenue. So this is the mix for each of the three facilities, which varies from facility to facility slightly. And the third one should say Kahidi. I don't know how we got that in there. So obviously I should have caught that. So that's a duplicate. We'll go back and fix that, Mickey. I don't know how many times I looked at that and looked right over it, but obviously we have 3 courses, not 2, and they all vary slightly with respect to the mix. This is based off what we've been experiencing historically, as obviously, you know, the last 3 years, our business model has changed considerably, and, you know, and to an extent, our rounds and our business is up about 40%. So each of the models is a little different, and we build that in, and we're just basing it off the best data we have, which is current user data from each of the 3 facilities. Correct. Yeah. No, but it's not. That's Tanasi twice. Yeah. It's a different number. So the promotional and rack rate for Kahidi is higher than the other 2 golf courses. So this just gives you a feel for where we've been historically with respect to our rounds, and you go back not too far, and you look at 2019, which was a banner year, and we did 75,000 rounds. So COVID came in, everybody stayed home, everybody wanted to get outdoors, outdoor recreation in every respect, went through the roof, especially golf. Golf was a benefactor of all that. More new people to the game, people getting reconnected to the game. So we went up some 40%, as I mentioned, from 19, and what we've done historically to the last 3 years. Obviously, things are very different. So we're trying to navigate this and steer our golf battleship as quickly as we can as we adjust to the new model of golf here in Tellico Village. So it just gives you a feel for where we've been historically and how that directly relates to rainfall and weather. And something that we've experienced here lately is incredible weather. So this fall has been like unlike any other I've ever experienced. It's been the best fall for golf you can ever imagine. We've had 3 Octobers. September was October, October was October, and thus far November's October. And there's some years we go straight from July, August to November. So obviously we've had incredible weather for golf, very challenging with respect to, you know, course maintenance. The lack of rainfall, I'm sure your lawns are suffering. If you try to establish grass this fall, some sort of interseeding or overseeding is extremely difficult because Mother Nature has not provided at all. So golfers, get out when we're done with the meeting today, go out there, tee it up. It's going to be 70 degrees again. We got a few more good days, and then reality is going to hit and hit hard. So this gives you a feel for where we've been historically on rounds and how it directly ties in with weather. And we've been benefiting from some really good weather this year and the past few years related to you know, precipitation, and you can see how that directly kind of parallels with our golf rounds. All right, Mickey. This is our daily fee structure and trend. Again, it just shows the 5% from 22 to 23. There's a little bit of rounding there to make the pennies come out, but this shows you a little bit of a trend where we've been on our daily fees, you know, from 2020 to now. And, you know, again, we did a lot of research and benchmarking with our peer facilities, a couple that are next door, Wind River and Rarity Bay. We have great relationships with those folks, the folks at Fairfield Glade, which is a similar community to us. We have great relationships with those folks. Willow Creek, Guani Farms, anywhere our folks might go tee it up. We try to network with those folks and share data and information. And everybody, for the most part, was going to be the 5 to 6% increase, trying to navigate, obviously, the inflation and offset costs, which is where we've landed as well. So almost mirror image with respect to Fairfield Glade. Our member rate is in essence going up $2, and our guest rate's going up $3, which is exactly what they've put in for their recommendation for 2023 as well. So that's the daily fee. Moving on, the equivalent for the Twilight daily fee. You're going to see the same thing. Moving on to the memberships, Mickey. And again, as we stated early on, the break even for the individual and two-person household have remained the same, and the twilight has gone up by 5 18-hole equivalent rounds, including cart, as 95+% of those folks take advantage of one of the cart options as well. So again, this is data-driven. We try to watch the data, make good use of the data, and steer these programs because, golf has never been stronger. Our programs are working, and we just continue to tweak them as we continue to navigate what golf has become in Tellico Village and what we anticipate the forward movement will look like. All right, Mickey? And this is just a roll-up summary of where we landed. And, initially when, we put all these numbers in, then we kind of go look, okay, that's where it is. And we have a target going in, and we've revamped that target, and we'll work towards that target moving forward. And, the net income was the target we're looking for. And we've achieved that with the adjustments we've made, in particular on the revenue side of things. Mickey?
Couple of things to mention. We had some rate increases for some of the hourly staff, so that's what's driving a little bit on the salaries. Some efforts were made on the benefits side, and kudos to them. They actually held our health insurance costs flat, so we tried to hold all of those costs fairly close across the board. There's some payroll taxes and some other benefits that are slightly increasing, but you should see fairly close through all of the divisions that it's a fairly flat employee benefit change there. All of the expense lines, again, Chris and his team went through with a fine-tooth comb, and they really pushed and bring them down. So through a very difficult time, they were very successful in making some reductions there.
Thank you.
Chris, we have a question online.
Okay.
It says, why would not golf green fees go up at least 9% inflation rate?
Yeah, that's your all's call. That's not what we're recommending. We tried to find different ways to offset, and that's where the element that we made the biggest adjustment to was the rounds, the volume, because you do your market research, and we just didn't feel like our folks could stomach that level of increase, and by making that stretch and reach, we'd have more people going off property, and our net revenue would go down. Moving on.
Hello.
Uh-oh.
Hello, Ed Grolleman. Mickey mentioned earlier that went back a lot of departments to go back and look at maintenance and capital to defer what they can. I was wondering what maintenance was deferred for in golf this year or capital projects, because as you know, you defer some maintenance, sometimes it's more costly to do it later than today.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in just a moment. I'm almost there, Ed. Thank you. You've teed me up perfectly.
Good question.
Moving forward, Mickey. This is just a new way of looking at things, and it just shows a positive trend with respect to our average yield per round. And it's a super high level. You'd have to get into far more detail to get a more true number, but it just gives you a feel for, at a high level, how our average rate per round continues to go up. All right, Mickey. And just to piggyback on what Ed just talked about, so we had already obviously, we've been working on the budget process for months now, literally months, and we were really into the budget process, and then something happened at Tenassie, distracted us a little bit. But as we went into the budget process, at the first time through, we had an additional project that we have since taken out because of the fire. So we had already gone through with a fine-tooth comb and gone line by line and tried to identify any and every item that we could possibly defer. So we'd already done that, and then we pulled out the big project with the Tenassie driving range that we were going to push forward with, obviously because we need to take care of our clubhouse and golf operation there first. So this is what's left as far as critical replacement needs are concerned for golf, and this is a far lower capital number than we've ever requested. Historically we've been in the $700,000 to $800,000 range because we've had some big infrastructure-related projects in the past that we've deferred. So these are the equipment items that we've got to have now to survive and continue to operate.
As we go through this, I guess just a comment I want to make, and this is for all the other departments as well. One of the things that the board, as well as Chet and Mickey, advised everybody is we want the capital budget basically to be must-haves. We absolutely have to do it. We view 2023 as a year with all the uncertainty going on, all the economy the way it is, inflation, that we need to tighten our belt. We need to be very diligent in how we spend our money and see how 2023 plays out. So that's where Chris mentioned that several of their large projects, including the driving range, the Tenasseee driving range, were deferred.
One of the challenges through all of this is that we have to make those hard decisions about, to the point this gentleman made, is, okay, it may not be a must-have today, but is it going to cost me 3 times as much in the future? And there was a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean hours of review and back and forth about, okay, what is this project and what is it going to cost us in the future? And to be direct, a lot of this is a guess. Because what something costs today, we have no idea, to be really honest, what it's going to cost us even as far as next month. And I'll give you some real numbers to deal with and how this can be affected in a very short period of time. I was managing property on Kauai, and we had 3 miles of fencing. And we budgeted in our reserve to pay $3 a post. And that decision was made in October. In November, the same year, when we went to buy them, they were $11 a post because steel went up that much. And so that's kind of a small example, but a real example of you do the best you can to come up with the numbers that you have, based on, you know, your crystal ball, so to speak, about what costs are going to go up to. But that's all it is. And we have to be able to roll with it. And so back to, I think it was Cap's term about what are we putting into the reserves, we have a certain level of percentage every year that we kind of track. And it's not to be 70% funded or any of those kind of things. It's to say, how can we accommodate those, I'm trying to look for a politically correct, oh shit moments, that you don't know what that cost is going to be. And so that's why that there's some fluidity to this. And because we are such a huge complex, it's not as simple as it sounds. And so I want to commend and also point out to all those watching that the staff has sweated blood over this. It's not been just a trivial process. And part of this process that we've gone through is educating the staff on how budgets are built and why.
I have a general question for Chris right in front of me. I know that in the past, as I understood when I was working on these budgets in detail and that, Jim West had some contacts, it seemed, with different manufacturers of equipment. And he was able to come up with secondhand equipment that was maybe 1 year old from courses like the Masters and very, very high-level courses that maybe used their equipment only 1 year. And we were able to get some pretty good buys, as I remember. And I don't know, Chris, whether you have similar type contacts or if there's any way to potentially get some used equipment.
I was that contact, Cap. So I spent a couple years in the equipment business. So thank you, Jim West. But actually, we did the legwork, and we continue to do that. And we try to maximize the dollar, and we get incredible life out of our equipment. Our technician, our operators do a phenomenal job, and it's no different than our peers in public works. But we get every hour at every machine that we can to the point that it becomes a problem or we have concern there. So as we bring these requests forward individually, you'll see some high hours, some high miles, even the pickup truck. That pickup truck has 250,000 miles on it. It looks perfect. We've taken excellent care of it, but obviously it's time to swap it out. So as we bring those forward individually, you'll see all the different options, and we try to obviously do the right thing at every turn and maximize the dollar here for ourselves and the POA.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, a used Kubota tractor and a used pickup were two of Chris's
Correct.
recent capital purchases. So they're living that right now.
Yes, sir.
They're doing a nice job.
Thank you. All right, last slide, Mickey. It's just a summary slide, just to say, again, thank you for what's been an incredible year, a banner year. Obviously, we had a little detour there. that we're managing now, but another record year in participation across the board with our leagues, our events, our player development programming, just rounds in general. We hosted 2 major state events. Kudos to what we've accomplished and what we've become in Telco Village Golf. We've developed quite the reputation across the state and across the region. We didn't historically we would have never been asked to host those level of events, and let alone 2 in a single calendar year. So that was quite the honor and privilege to do so. Ongoing continuous improvement, again, that's the name of the game when it comes to golf, especially golf course maintenance. And we're able to conclude the Kahidi Bunker project, which is significant, short-term and long-term, and obviously the playability, the aesthetics, the sustainability across the board, everything has exceeded expectations with respect to that project. And the Tanasi fire recovery efforts are ongoing. You'll start to hear some information with respect to the different options at Tanasi. We're working very diligently on that while balancing our day-to-day in this budget process. So we've got a lot of balls in the air that the management team specifically is managing on your behalf to try to come up with the best game plan moving forward for Tanasi. But ultimately, we're set up for another great year in 2023, and the future's never been brighter for Telco Village Golf, and we're so very grateful for your patronage and continued support.
I just have one question on the Tanasi recovery
Uh-huh.
and rebuilding. Is it a correct assumption that between the grant and between the insurance that will cover what is needed to be done to rebuild?
The grant is on the sewer system. The
You wanna
grant
build
is
that?
on the sewer system, so it's just the insurance proceeds that we're looking at as far
And will
as
that be
Tenacity.
enough to cover? Is the assumption that we will be able to rebuild for the insurance amount? Or are
Good
you
question.
going to hit us later and say, no, we need X more?
Well, there are certainly options, and they're trying to figure out what's the best. Right now, we're planning that the insurance proceeds will equal what the disbursement is going to be, but there's still some decisions to be made about what gets rebuilt.
To
That goes
clarify,
back-
what's
Any
in the
timeframe?
budget, what's in the budget today is $4.6 million over 2 years. That equates to our proceeds for Tanasi as it was insured for total replacement costs. Any discussions and commitments to anything larger, any more parking, will be greater than 4.6 million. That greater number, whether it's $1 million, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, will be paid for by property owners. So let's be clear, what's in the budget right now is rebuilding exactly what we had.
But let's also be clear that so far, based on the survey that was put out, the majority of people want either a bigger facility, if we keep it in one spot, to replace Tanasi, so not the same, or moving golf operations out to the end of hole number 1, which would basically say we need to be building 2 facilities. So either one of those 2 options will be more than the insurance proceeds. So as we go, we'll be communicating with everybody in terms of here are the site plans that we're looking at here, and then we want to get to the point where we're looking at projected costs so that so everybody understands where we are at any given time, and we have the option or the opportunity to comment, question, whatever as we go along.
We are projected, or you projected, 96,000 rounds for 2023. Is that correct?
That is what's in the budget, yes, sir.
Okay. At what point would you think you're going to reach critical mass on rounds?
That's pretty dang close. So that's, in essence, 32,000 rounds per golf course. And, what we've been doing, we feel like is a little much, but we've been managing beautifully. That's kudos to the team for continuing to go above and beyond. But we think we're really close to that number. And so we'll see what 96,000 looks and feels like. But, every indication is that, potentially we'll exceed that again next year. But that's a moving target as we continue to navigate the new model of golf here in Telco Village.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Parks and Rec, Simon, you're up.
And Mickey, while Simon's coming up, there was a general question, which I think you might cover later on when we get to reserves, but we'll ask it now and you can defer or wait, or say it now. I think this is for board or finance committee. Did you look at the impact of increasing user fees by 9.1% on our reserves as an increase over 5% on assessments?
Not sure I understand the question.
I think Roger's in the room. Do you want to ask the question? Roger, is he in here? I thought I saw him. It says, did you look at the impact of increasing user fees by 9.1%, so on the different departments, on our reserves as an increase over the 5%?
So all of the divisions were pretty close to a straight 5% increase. The only thing that we are projecting to increase is the individual assessments, and we proposed both a 5% and a 9.1, which is the CPI over the last 12 months.
And I'll interject there. Chris did answer that to a certain extent as it relates to golf. If you raise the price for golf too much, people will go somewhere else, and that'll lower our revenue, which then means that we as property owners will need to cover that loss in revenue, which means basically the subsidy goes up. So it's a fine balancing act. They've got to, whatever increases we make, we've got to be sure that we are with the market, or we're going to lose rounds and lose revenue. So it's, like Chris said, it's a balancing act.
And I think we should defer to Chris in regards to most of that. His fingers and pulses are on the markets, and he knows what the other courses and whatnot, and he's made those recommendations, I think. Parks and Rec.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. On behalf of myself, the Recreation Advisory Committee, our staff, thank you for the opportunity to continue serving the community of Tellico Village. Before I start talking about the fiscal responsibility that we have, I want to talk briefly about one of the main things, or the main passions that we have in doing what we do in Parks and Recreation. And bear with me for a moment. I think you'll find this interesting. But it comes from the National Recreation and Parks Association, the most recent conference we had. Usually when we go, you have a keynote speaker, and it tends to be someone from the profession going, yay, us. And we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Well, this year we had the CNN correspondent, the medical correspondent, talking about, yeah, from CNN? Okay. Anyways, talking about the positive impacts that Parks and Recreation has on people. And what they did was they looked at the 5 areas throughout the world that had the most centennials, people living over 100, and look at what are the commonalities. And there's a lot of different commonalities, but like there's 4 main ones that really impact the profession that I'm in. And one of the things that keeps people going that long, the first one is you keep moving. Doesn't mean you got to run a marathon, you got to be a pickleball pro, it just means you got to keep moving. The next one is a sense of purpose. It doesn't matter what that purpose is, but you have a sense of purpose in what you're doing with your life. The next one is using your skills, your talents, and your mind to your best ability. The last one is a positive connection with your community. And I try to keep those in mind as we're doing all the programs and the facilities that we do for Parks and Recreation. I'm going to highlight now some of the successes and things that we've done in 2022, and all of them, if you'll take a look back, they focus on those same 4 principles. The biggest one, the biggest win, and by the way, I like to be on a winning team. I like to win. I like to be the best. I like to be the one that people try to follow. I don't like trying to play catch up. I've been in both roles. The Pickleplex, I feel like, was a win for the whole community. It's a collaboration of the Parks and Recreation Department that spearheaded it. It's a calibrated effort with Thomas Tellico Foundation, the Pickleball Club, the POA, Tahiti Chain Gang, private commercial donors, and the Public Works Department with Caleb and Clayton and crew. They went above and beyond to make sure and make it the best facility. It wasn't just about the actual project at Pickleplex. It could have been anything. But it was the sense of community and hundreds of people that came together, donated money, and made it happen. We had a great celebration this past week and opening it up, and it was a packed house. So that's the things that we really enjoy doing. Next is the Chota Cycle Room. Part of our strategic plan that we did in 2018 was concept of grow in place. instead of trying to get bricks and mortar, grow, spend lots of money, what can we do with our existing facilities to grow in place in a more strategic manner? And with that in mind, we looked at our numbers. We have 2 racquetball courts over at Chota, and we had like 6 people playing. And there's 600 square foot in a racquetball court. It didn't make sense to continue doing that. So with that, we brought it to the board and it was approved, and we made an indoor cycling room. And with that, we got top-of-the-line bikes, we got great instructors, and now we're almost at capacity for those classes and asking for more. We increased our kayak and paddleboard use to 2 sessions, 5 days a week during the summer months, and that's something that everyone can get an opportunity to get out and try the lake. On the kayak, try the paddleboard, you have instruction, or you can just take it by yourself, or you can bring your kids or grandkids when they come. We added a new personal trainer to the department for a total of 4 trainers. We offer 88 group fitness classes, of which 49 are different types of classes. And that also goes back to growing in place. When we hit that pandemic, where else can we go? What can we do? People want to have classes. We opened up the Chota Gym to have classes, and now we're packed in there. We also added 5 more miles of trails, and we're focused on maintaining the trails that we have. Our focus for the Parks and Recreation Department for 2023 is enhancement of parks, recreation, and trails. And also, the Thomas Tellico Foundation just completed a strategic plan which adopted enhancement of green space as their key focus for 2023. And I think that falls right into the budget. If we look back at the trail system of like 30 miles of trails that we did for less than $10,000, which would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if we had professionals do it, trying to do things that doesn't impact residents. The next thing I've got up here is the recreation facilities comparison, which is a benchmark. If you take a look at the top, this is our 2023 rate. For a household, it's $638. For an individual, it's $411. That's for the year. And if you look over to the right, it has all the different amenities that we offer for that. And then we compare it to all the other folks in the area, our competition. If you see, we are way under everybody else, except you get down to Gold's Gym. But one of the things there's a couple things that weren't added on there, where they have a maintenance fee once a year, and they have like a processing fee that they also add to that takes it up. The other thing that's not shown on there as far as the amenities that we offer that I think is huge that we offer here, and that's the TOC program, the Tennessee Orthopedics program, where you can come in and get injury assessment. You don't have to be a member. And it's also for staff that can help with our medical costs. But you have a bad back, a knee, an elbow, anything, you can come in and they can take a look at it and assess it. You might be able to get some exercises for it. If not, they can also refer you, of course, that's part of their gig, is refer you to TOC. But typically, you can get an appointment within a few days versus waiting a few months. So that's something that no one else offers. So of course, we look at that when we look at our membership rates. So the next one is a breakdown of our department fees, and we're looking at the Recreation Advisory Committee, myself, staff. We recommend taking a 5% increase this next year. So your household goes from $608 to $638. Individual goes from $691 to, $391 to $411. And your additional household resident is 62. It was 62, now it's going to be 65. So you look at the bottom, has a net change, 30, 20, and $3. And guest fee staying the same. Okay, next here we track membership numbers each month. And please try to get caught up in each month numbers. The main thing is the year-to-date average. If you look back, you can see about when the pandemic hit. In 2020, we dropped significantly. And now we're up to pre-pandemic numbers, the biggest numbers that we've ever had. And this is an interesting era of what's happening next. What do we anticipate for the future? Are we going to continue growing? Are we going to level off? We feel comfortable saying we're going to increase 3% next year. And that is not over the budget numbers for 2020, but the actuals that we've got from 2022. So you got a 5% increase and a 3% increase in memberships.
This schedule is a quick summary of the revenues that were from trended 2020 through the budget. And what we tried to do is figure out what was driving the increases, whether it was from the rate or was it the change from the volume of members, memberships and users. So we provided a little bit of an analysis there between the 2 years of 84,000 is the increase, and of which 49 is from the rate change and 36,000 is the increase that we anticipate in the memberships. So this is total memberships that have come up, but the revenues have continued to go up slightly as a result of those rates that have come through there. So following through with that, the 1.1 million that was projected shows for 2023 a little bit of an increase in some of the hourly rates as was approved. We tried to hold our employee benefits fairly flat, and so there's some not much changes in there. There were some increases in some of the maintenance and operating expenses, the pool supplies, those types of things. And again, Simon and his team did a good job, again, to go back and flush out, figure out where we could save, where we absolutely had to have some additional expenditures as we go into the next years. So we ended up with this reserve subsidy. We're at a deficit of $438,000. He anticipates some capital and some maintenance costs to be expended, totally $132,000, and his net subsidy is $570,000 after the capital. So what we're trying to do is look at this subsidy year over year, trying to hold it flat. And as you can see, Simon and his team have been miracle workers in regards to it, because they've gone from that $1 million in 2020 down to this year where they're about at $438,000. So great increases in the overall fees and cost structures they're maintaining, bringing that down to a reduced subsidy, which again brings about that savings for what we try to do from other sources.
Mickey, what's the relationship between the net income / loss line and then the available for reserves / subsidy?
Thank you. So this, from a typical P&L statement, and Steve is right, this really shouldn't be categorized as net income, and we'll try to get that corrected. But this $785,000, if you take it and add back the $346,000 that's depreciation, which is non-cash, this says that this is the net cash that was required to operate this location. And so that's what we're looking at all of the locations. What cash is required, that if it's a positive number, then they're generating additional revenues for the group. In most cases, each of the groups has some type of a subsidy, and we're wanting to hold that subsidy flat.
Or improve it.
Or improve it, as was done by Simon and his team. They've clearly done a great job in pushing those numbers down. So as we go into this year, while it is a budget, it's still, after a few months, the budget kind of gets tossed out and you start looking at where you're trending and where you're tracking. And so that's going to be our goal, is to meet with the managers every month, monitor what the expenditures are, find out what's happening within their groups, and making sure that we achieve these numbers. And if we have issues, then we try to figure out where we can cut to try to keep us on track for these targets.
Mickey, would you flip back to 33 for a second, please? Just someone had asked in the chat, should you take up your rates 9.1%? And I think those top two rate and volume analysis numbers show you how Simon and the team have thought about, it's a 5% rate increase that's in there, but at the same time, he's growing 3% the population of people who are participating. So if you put 9% in there, yes, you're getting closer to some of the marketplaces, but you're also going to then lose some people who would have joined the club at the lower rates, or at the higher rate, or excuse me, lower rate structure. So it's a combination of how much can the market bear as you're putting that into your rate structure, but then also are you attracting new people to join the rec organization? So that's what each of the department managers are messing with, I'll say, as they turn the knobs and they say, how high can I take the revenue on the user fee side of the equation while still attracting people to the amenity?
Well said.
Simon, we have a question online really quick from Karen. She says additional changes to the Pickleplex captured in the rec budget. Is there any additional changes happening at the Pickleplex?
For this next year? No. There's some, the pickleball club may provide some things like bleachers, and we really need to assess for several months of, when you get a brand-new facility like that, the first couple of weeks, people, this isn't right, that's not right, let's do this, let's let it flush out for a while, and let's find out what are the real issues, and then from there, unless it's a safety issue, of course, from there we start upgrading. At this point right now, the things that have been pointed out have been some bleachers, and that's something the pickleball club can take care of, and also they can work through Thomas Tellico. So in answer to the question, no.
Well, and resurfacing the existing courts is in the budget.
Yes, but that's, you'll see it down at the bottom there, the reserve spending of the maintenance, it's $60,000 to resurface at Kahiti and to resurface over at the Wellness Center on the current courts.
I have a question about that. Bill Bush, I'm a member of the Pickleball Club. I think this is on. There was money in the budget to resurface 7 and 8 this year, and that didn't happen. Why?
I'm really upset that that didn't happen, and one of the reasons is we can't get anybody to come in and do the work. Even Baseline, who came and they did our path and they did the whole court process for the Pickleplex, the plan was to get them just to jump over and do the other courts while they're there, maybe even save money. They are so packed with business, they couldn't do it. And their competitors, I contacted also, they can't do it. It may be 2023, 2024 before they can. I keep pushing and looking at other alternatives. Another alternative is that you patch them. But that's a patch job, but you're looking at maybe 2-3 years possibly getting out of it. What I want to do is resurface them completely and get 10 years out of them. So we're going to keep striving and trying to find someone that's professional that can come out and do the job.
I'm also on the PSAC, and one of the things we find with roads in particular, you need to get on the vendor schedule now for a planned program for next year. If you don't get on it ahead of their plan for the coming year, it's not going to happen. And usually that could happen about mid-year. May have happened in the middle of this year already. So all departments need to realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were actually on the plan to have that done when the Pickleplex was built. He had back out, so he can't do it. He's got bigger jobs he's got to go to.
There's an old Chinese proverb that's really considered a curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And the truth of the matter is we are living in interesting times. And as this applies from other properties that I've managed, to your point about putting things out there possibly a year in advance, and I don't know if you really caught what Simon was saying, is that vendors are now backing out of contracts because they have to choose between a $60,000 project or a $160,000 project, and they're going to blow off the $60,000 just so they can do the $160,000. And this is a change that I've never experienced in my 20-year career, that when you go out and you get a vendor to sign off on it, they've never backed out of it, but they do now. And they're willing to take a loss. And so we're having to do we're going to start having to do some interesting things in our contract to make that painful, so that if they back out, it's going to cost them. And so those are the techniques that we're now going to have to apply that we may never have had to apply in the past, simply because of the change in how business is being done.
Next section is food.
I'm here for Mitzi as she's in the corner ready to, I think, drop dead. So I'll speak for her. The board, one of the board's paths for 2023 will be a complete review of all food service operations. I think they've been talking about that for a few years now. So with Chet in the house now, I think that'll probably happen in next year. As far as the Kahiti kitchen, that's a big piece of 2023. That will be really up as far as when we can get, when we can get equipment, when we can finish it. Still on 6 to 8 month delivery times for certain pieces. But at the end of the day, once that's done, it's going to greatly expand the ability to provide really what Kahidi needs. If you look at the next slide, which Mickey put together for revenue, you'll see if you actually put 2019 in there, revenue has grown over 100% in the last 3 years. That's a huge number. At the end of this, I don't know if you guys are going to use it or not, look at it or not, but at the end of this, there's a little PowerPoint I put together about what's going on at Kahidi right now. Part of this growth is the growth of Kahidi in general. A good part of this growth is the Kahidi Committee, which is a bunch of Kahidi residents that we've been together for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, and they have just been a huge push to utilize that space. And now with the new Mountain Terrace and the new community center area, it's just been amazing. So the kitchen is definitely needed. As far as the next slide goes, just a quick roll-up. Mickey, this is a full food service roll-up, correct? Correct. Okay. So revenues from the food service standpoint, revenue just takes into account Kahidi. Cost of sales just takes into account Kahidi. The salaries and employment benefits, again, those are just based on Kahidi operational. And the rest, some of the other total costs, operating expense, maintenance costs, services, et cetera, take into account all 4 restaurants, correct? Yeah. So I'm not sure. I'm certainly open for questions or discussion, but I know we've talked about this a little bit. There were a lot of costs that were removed based on not having Tanasi Clubhouse. A little bit is up in the air as to whether there will or will not be food service at Tanasi next year. So if there is not, these expenses should come down a bit more as well. Unfortunately, there was some guesswork in there.
So just for everybody's benefit, do you want to expound on what you mean by that?
So the board has this. So we've put. So Chris has put an amazing plan in place, which is a beautiful building. We're waiting to find out if insurance is going to pay for it, or I should say, you guys are waiting to find out if insurance is going to pay for it. There is also a plan that I put in place, which would be basically a food trailer that would provide the basic needs for golfers and really up the game on the experience. Instead of just being able to play golf, you'll be able to grab a pitcher of beer. You'll have a nice little patio area. You can grab a burger. You can grab some chicken tenders, a grilled cheese sandwich. There is a hot food option, again, with draft beer, which was we felt was a real need. That is about a $75,000 cost, and the board is waiting to find out if the insurance company will pay for that. Then it's for sure going to happen, I believe. If not, then it's kind of up in the air. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I have Ken Boline, a former board member and Finance Advisory Committee member, for those who don't know me. I'm a little bit upset about the fact that all you're doing is giving us totals. There's no breakdown for Tokwa, the Yacht Club, Kahidi, et cetera. So I think you need to give us more information on the food service. Thank you.
We have those costs by location, right? So that's really what he's asking about, because everything else is strictly Kahidi. So yeah, we can get that.
Good?
All right, thanks, Andy.
Yeah?
There's a couple of general questions while we're transitioning. I don't know that this is really a question, more of a comment, and this is reverting back to when we were discussing Tanasi. rebuild. The survey did not reflect all questions or all options available. Others have been proposed since then that would stay within insurance amount or very close. I recommend that people that still have feedback, there is the feedback form still available on the POA website under News and Tenacity Updates. You can always submit feedback there, and we'll continue to review that as we move forward. And if you think we've missed an option, feel free to send it in there, and we'll review it as a committee. Yes, we share it in the Gram all the time, but we can make sure to do that. And I shared it on the live chat, the link to the feedback form as well. And then Norris would like to know if we're planning on hiring a purchasing manager next year. Is that in the budget?
I think the expectation is that we would fill that position. We need to do some evaluations, make sure that the need is there and how we would structure that, but it's certainly a consideration.
So it is in your head count next year.
Yes. Yes, it was in the head count for this year, but didn't get filled. Open position.
All right, one more question before Clayton starts. We always see the increase, but no one has mentioned if it has been reviewed or not. If we are managing heavy or too much staff in certain areas, and the cost could be reduced. I would say that is being reviewed.
Yeah, all of the head counts, we went back and looked again by period, make sure there was no increases, things were getting approved. All of the positions that are there have been board approved and no changes go through without that. There were a few open positions, and then this year for the expectation, there's a few new ones within the Public Works, and we'll have some conversations with those as we get to them.
I think what that might be referring to also and is there basically an operational review going on that says, hey, even the head counts that we have in place and are approved, is that the right number? And I would say that we've got to give Chet and his team some time to look at that, to determine, are we right-sized for the work that we have in all departments?
Right. Every so often, a business unit needs to do some self-examination because it is very easy for creep to go in there. We hope that we become a little more efficient. Technologies happen and we're able to do some of those types of things. So again, once Chet and I have a chance to get through, it's certainly on my radar to make some evaluation about those things.
It's also the reason why the purchasing agent has not been put in place yet, because we're still evaluating how we manage the bodies. The task that a purchasing agent would have is unquestionably needed based on our size and need. But I think we have to evaluate where are we with everybody else before we plug that hole, so to speak. And so we are definitely actively, and frankly, part of the process to get us to this budget, it was part of the evaluation in that as well, and it's still ongoing.
One follow-up to that, when the board brought in Chet, one of his top priorities in the first 90 days is a complete review of the organization. And after that 90 days, to come to the board and tell us what he finds out and what he thinks he needs to do to move down the highway. So I would say Chet's still in his 90-day period.
And that was before Tenacity, but we haven't extended his 90 days, have we?
Yeah, we haven't extended it.
Other questions before we move on? Docks and RVs.
Okay. So on docks, we had proposed a 3% increase is what the board wanted to move forward with. So we have that 3% increase. If you look at docks, we have, revenue continues to grow, but we have added maintenance that we need to do. So you'll see in our budget for this year, we got added maintenance where we took on the new, the previous Cooper docks, so there's added money in there for revenue to get those up to the standard of all of our other docks. So we will be doing that. We have a couple items on capital that would be some jet ski replacements that are damaged that we need to replace, and some power pedestals that need to be replaced. but for docks, it's just mainly maintenance, for next year.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Where did the 942 2023B number come from? 2022 final is 877. Where did all of those boats come from?
I had some schedules that I had copied some information from. I'm not familiar with the slips and the docks yet to know whether that's a reasonable number or not.
There's 880, and we're not, so
Okay.
it can't go, well, unless you guys are going to buy all of us boaters another 80-something slips.
There was we'll go back and reevaluate.
Okay. And that number 942 then reflects through the budget, down to gas, stock revenue, townhouse, all that?
I'm
Okay.
not familiar enough. I'll try to go back and get you an answer on that.
All right, thank you.
One thing that's on the schedule that we did want to mention is that going into 2022 and prior, we had charged 50 cents per gallon on the fuel. We looked around at the other areas around and decided that perhaps that should be increased to 75 cents. So we're budgeting an increase of 75 cents per gallon. An increase of 25%, 25 cents per gallon.
So, Pat, I think you bring up a good point, in that, there was discussion about adding slips in 2023, but we said in some of our initial review sessions that may not be determined as a need, so therefore it was taken out. Is that correct? Yeah, deferred.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, deferred, along with additional PWC, along with kayak storage. And the only issue that I'm taking exception with here is the 942 to the 877. And making sure that everybody understands we're also not asking for, and I'm gonna need a nod here, because the last time it wasn't real clear to me, we're not going up 3% on kayak storage. That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what we said.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it didn't just sort of slide in there like 942 somethings did.
So what is that number? What is the number of slips, Pat? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Right now, my report shows 880.
880?
Uh-huh.
So this number, if your number is correct, then that 2022 forecast would be 880 as well as the 2023 budget.
That's correct.
The 900, there's actually 940 instead of 942, but the 940 includes PWCs and kayaks.
That's on
That's-
mine too. I got PWCs and kayaks on here too. I got the report that you guys give the Marine Advisory Committee every single month. And I won't go down through this, but every size boat, Brad will look at them, there's every size boat that we've got and covered and PWC and kayak. And they're all added up right there.
We'll go back and compare notes and figure out what's right.
Right.
Well, that means the revenue numbers are wrong, right?
Yeah, that was my point.
Yeah.
It just it's got to flow through the whole thing.
Maybe, or my number is wrong and what's in the budget is right, so.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
Maybe.
We'll get it straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cap Purvis again. It's sort of a general question. When I'm looking at your numbers on RV lots, I don't know where the lots disappeared to. That if you look at actual 337 and now we're talking 258. I know at one time when we looked at the area in Davis Ferry, there were several areas that we had talked about expanding to therefore increase the number of RV lots available. And I don't remember ever taking any out of that inventory, so I'm just slightly confused on 337 down to 258.
Yeah, I was going to review that, but you beat me to it. Thank you very much, because that's going down too. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I think there was some redrafting of the roadways and the spacing between those, which ended up us losing a handful of those slips, if I'm right.
Yeah, there was some of those, lost from when we redone the lot to make it more usable, more user-friendly, but a couple of years ago, Jeff Gagley had done away with the RV spot right behind the Public Works shop. There were several, spots back there. There was probably 60 or 70 back there. that was taken out and was used for rock bin storage and stuff like that. So, to where Public Works had the room to grow.
Joe Bogartis, just a point of, all right, Joe Bogartis, just a clarification. Dock fees are going up 3%, kayak slips are not going up.
That's proposed.
Is that the correct assumption at this point? Okay.
And for a little background for those that are new that don't understand, a group of people got together a number of years ago when we had lots of vacant slips, and they said, can we have kayak? They then formed a group. They went out. They pre-signed up, as we're doing now in Kahiti, for kayak storage down there. They put a deposit down. As that deposit grew, we then went out without Timeless Calico and all that, and we took over Yacht Club slips and put in kayak storage that's secured. Over the course of the years, the agreement was that they would gradually go up in fees, and they would pay that back in effect by their storage fees. They would pay for it, which is just like the rest of the boats are doing. But what then happened was somehow that agreement got forgotten, apparently, because the fees just kept going up. So we had people down there with $300, $400, $500 kayaks that were facing a $400 a year fee. So it's like total your kayak every year, you know? So we put a slowdown on that last year. We did not increase from $200, and we're proposing it again this year. And so far, everybody nodded yes.
This shows just an increase in what the revenues have been over the last several years. This is a projection of where we are as far as total revenues, costs.
Hey, Mickey, just so everybody online can hear, can you slide your
Oh, yeah, thank you.
mic closer? Thank you.
Going back into this, you can see some of these changes that we're making here. The gas revenue is expected to go up by almost 100,000. And so when we're looking through in these changes, that's where the increase in revenues is typically coming. Costs have been held fairly straight. There's some maintenance costs that we've got built in here to bring the Cooper docks up to the grade that we need them to be, and so that's why the maintenance costs are up. Otherwise, most everything else is pretty close in line. So a net surplus of 344,000, adding back in the depreciation means that docks and RVs are generating a net surplus of 458,500. We've got a little bit of capital that we plan to expend for the year. Questions or thoughts about the docks?
Yeah, I got the last comments, and Sue wouldn't let me go if I didn't say something, because, but anyway, I want to make a point here. As you go back to page 11, which I know we need some corrections on there, but page 11 has the page with all of the departments on there, from admin all the way through commercial. And if you look on that page 11, admin, it does not have a parentheses around it. And docks does not have a parentheses around it, but yet, apparently our culture on the Finance Advisory Committee and the board is that we will continue to go up in docks. And I understand it's a great value. We have a great system. We have repairs. We're going to put a lot of money into the CCI docks. I fully understand, but if these numbers are correct, we're still going to generate positive net income over expenses of $346,797 back to the POA, because I just can't resist, Sue, I'm sorry, because you've got nowhere else to go. You can't go down the street and play golf somewhere. You can't go to Gold's Gym. You got us. Our culture is it's assessment fees and user fees. These folks, these 880 folks, have stepped up and they paid it every single year, and there's going to come a time that you're going to have to say, We're going to go with the original model, and that model was assessment fees and user fees. If you don't want to pay a subsidy, play golf. If you don't want to pay a subsidy, eat at our restaurants. You don't want to pay a subsidy, work out at our gyms, because these people are working out and we're generating $346,797. And I got about 45 other things I can do, but I'll shut up. Thanks. It's always been at least $250,000 or more every year, even putting in wave attenuators, new docks, everything. Correct? Yes.
No, not when you add your capital.
No, go back.
Not when you add your capital, my friend.
Okay, all right, okay. And so then we get back to, and this is the same thing, and again, I've been doing this for 5 years. And Mickey and Chet, I apologize because you guys are new to this, but I just can't help myself, is that you end up with this. And this shows that there are 942, 877. The numbers are not right. And every single year I say, clean up the numbers so you can tell me where I'm wrong. But every single year, the numbers come back different. And the first thing I do, and I trust you implicitly. I trust everybody implicitly. But the first thing I do is, since I've been asking for 5 years and I can't get the numbers right, I look at your numbers, and the first two I saw was, holy cow, there's 80 more slips they're playing in there. What the heck is that?
We'll get it right.
Thank you.
Public Works. So Public Works had some changes in the rate structures, and the FAC may be able to jump in. I'm coming in a little bit late to the game, and so the logics behind some of these are a little bit different. From 22 to 23, the levels at which the water is being assessed and the rates that are being assessed have been changed. Whereas in 22, there was a decreasing rate, whereas in 2023, there's now going to be an increasing rate. Anybody on the FAC that want to help with some of that?
Yeah, I would refer everybody to the last board meeting. We went through the whole rationale for the water rate structure change, primarily driven by the fact that we see a 25 to 35 million gallon per month increase in water usage driven by irrigation. And so we're trying to create a tiered structure where we're trying to get folks who are using 30, 40, 50,000 gallons of water a month to conserve. And so we're building a structure that frankly gets punitive if you consider to excessively overwater your yard. The big thing we're trying to do with that is to make sure that we're minimizing future investment in what would be, I'm going to get it wrong, Clayton, 16-inch lines?
Yes.
So we're trying to avoid putting in 16-inch mains to take care of that excessive water usage. That's why the even and the odd structure went into place, asking people to water on even odd days. And then we're trying to create a rate structure that asks people to use a prudent amount of water, not excessively overwater. So that rate structure is built accordingly. In that same process, when we went through every single one of our water bills for every single home, one of the things that became clear is the vast majority, well over 95% of the people, are not using more than 5,000 gallons a month, meaning it's not going into the sewer system at a level above 5,000 gallons. So we've adjusted the sewer cap, which used to cut off at 7,500 gallons, down to 5,000, which will de facto lower the sewer bill a little bit, bringing it in line with what people's actual usage is out there.
Thank you. The additional last section down there is the utility installations, and they remain unchanged from 22 to 23. Now, the volume of units that will be installed will be a little bit less, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. So, utility tanks, that were in process. We think going into '23, there's going to be 174 permits that are ready to be installed. There's going to be another 140 that will be sold throughout the year. And then we expect there to be an average of 17 that are going to be installed per month for a total of 238. In 2022, that number was about 340. So there's a decrease of a substantial number than that, which nets out to about $660,000 less revenue that we'll have for this particular portion of our revenue streams. There's some costs associated with it that will go down with that, so our net is still right at a 50% margin on all of those. But this gives us kind of a picture of where we're going to end up from a utility tank installation revenue stream. So this schedule breaks down each of the groups, water, sewer, installations, over trend of 2020 through the budget. And you can see some of the changes. The water revenue was outlined in those fee structures, expects to generate some additional revenue. Again, if it achieves the goal of adding some conservation and people are using less water, then we would see a decrease in some of these revenue streams from the water perspective. We talked about those, the reductions on the installation fees that will happen there. And again, I think my number may have gotten off on this one as well. I'll have to go back and check it. I made changes.
Okay, we have a question, Mickey.
It's on.
I was just making sure it was turned on. Kept Purvis again. Could you go back to the previous slide? All right, if you look down the bottom, revenue per tank installation. I don't know whether the Finance Committee, the board, or anybody considered we're about to make a pretty major investment in water and sewer. And I hear Steve's comments about preparation for service. So if you want to address service for new people coming in, and this is sort of where you get an impact fee, which we can't put into our numbers, certainly like the county does. But this is a place where we're going to see an impact over the next couple of years of some fairly significant amounts. Yesterday at the PSAC meeting, they voted on and approved about a $6 million investment in a holding tank for holding our sewer here prior to it moving forward. I don't know whether that's in this budget yet or not. I'm looking at Brad's little inquisitive face, so I'm presuming it might not be.
What was the number you said, Cap?
Huh?
What number did you say?
$6 million. I think that Clayton can answer that question.
Not for a holding tank, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Anyway, let me just finish my comment, then you guys can hash that out if you want. I'm just saying was there any thought to increasing, i.e. these type fees, because this is sort of our way at getting an impact fee, monies back in to having the system ready to service new accounts. Thank you.
A couple things I'd like to add to that. One of the challenges that I know that the board has thought about this in the Finance Committee, and I hope the homeowners are beginning to realize, we're coming to an end of an era here at Tellico Village, and that is growth. There is going to be a moment in time where we no longer can get to put up here in the budget, well, these are the prices that we hope we can bring in by new homeowners buying new lots. Now, of course, the turnover of lots will always happen. So one of the things that I am actively evaluating is what are our areas, and everybody hates this term, but it's a reality. What are the areas within our community that we can monetize as these homes turn over, as we build new homes, to bring in additional revenue? Because one of the arguments, and to be honest, it's a fair argument, I've been living here for 50 years, or however many, I'm exaggerating, 12 years, and I've put into the reserves all this time. Well, new guy comes, and he gets the benefit of all this new infrastructure that I've paid into, and he has nothing to pay in. He just bought his lot, and no big deal. Well, we're trying to find ways that we can appropriately monetize the process of buying a home here or reselling a home here and have them pay into that pie. And I think that's a key step we're going to have to take, because whether anybody sees the train coming or not, it is indeed coming. And so we have got to build ourselves a way of maintaining the structure of the community after build-out is done. That was a long way of saying, yes, Cap, we're looking at that.
Norris made a comment. At the end of September, water and sewer revenue is about 1.5 million over cost, so that alone should help provide future revenue. And then I have some doc questions that I'll ask just when you get done with this public works side.
So, Mickey, back to that slide, just informed, if you look across the installed columns of the 17s all the way across, that would equal 204 and not 238.
Okay. So from a P&L summary, total revenues at the cost levels we expect to hold. There'll be some margin erosion, and we lost some revenue from utilities. Or there'll be some gain because of the margins that we have are on a bigger group. Keeping the salaries constant, with the exception of there was some additional staffing that we hope to add through this. And within this budget, there were a total of 6 positions that we've added. 2 for the installation of the new meter systems, 1 for a valve program that you hope to install, 2 for lost it. 1 is a CDL driver and 2 for,
2 of those would be for patching and sign program, and 1 of them would be a CDL driver for a brush truck.
correct. I know there was conversations back and forth about that. Some of the costs that you can see in this maintenance line, there's some savings that they think that will be achieved, so it's more moving some of the cost out of this from the road patching and some of the other work up into the salaries lines. But the anticipation is that those 6 individuals would benefit in some of the savings that we could have there.
I have a question. If I look at the total salaries, it's going up. I understand the reasons why, but it looks like the benefits line should actually go up along with the salaries, because a lot of the benefits are tied to the salaries, and it's going down.
We'll look at it. I don't know what the change was there. We've tried to push and keep those costs in line. I don't know what was in there that may not have been.
Everywhere else, the benefits have gone up where the salary structure has gone up.
Correct.
So,
Our goal for 2023 would be to, I know we've had a lot of discussion over this new water meter system. That would be one of the goals that Public Works would really like to be able to push forward with changing over the entire village to this new water meter system. We really feel that that would be a huge savings for POA, and that comes along with the support of the PSAC committee. They totally support that project. So that would be a couple of those employees, and the long-term gain on that would be tremendous, and the short-term gain would be tremendous.
So just to be clear, last time we kept those employees to install the 1,000 meters? Or did we? Yeah, there were 3, but we kept them in there, or did we kick them out? Move them forward?
I believe it dropped, should have gone to 1 plus 1 for valve actuation, is what our last conversation.
So anyway, the meter installation is
1,000 meters, not
Right, okay, got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and again, I won't have to go through this because I was under the impression that it was just gone, but PSAC made their statement of their recommendation, and I did a cost analysis, how much we're gonna save, and if you just look at, I'll just hit the high points here, because it also affects another thing we have. So everybody get ready to hold on to your seatbelts here, because total water we used from July of 2021 to June of 2022 was 458,528,929 gallons. That's a lot of water. So then that breaks down to total water per month for 38,210,744. And what we found by putting in these new meters is they are not measuring low flow, or they're measuring high flow. And then PSAC meeting yesterday that we reviewed 3 areas where Clayton himself was notified of a water leak in his house because it picked up on it, because it reads it constantly. The other 2 were in Telego Village, and both of them had exorbitant rates, were challenging the rates, and when we put the new meters in, we found out that each of them had at least 2 leaks in their house that was causing this, so the leaks actually stopped. So with that in place, the percent loss that we're losing water per month is 23%. So the monthly water loss is 8,788,471 gallons per month, water loss. So if you only take 30% of that, 25% of that, you're still talking 2 million gallons going down our sewer. And now we have a water intrusion issue. So we need to get these things in. And for anybody interested, I've got all the data, put it all together, to show you how much we'll save, and it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next couple of years. Okay?
And our other main focuses for 23 will be street maintenance as usual. We have a great program that PSAC helped us put together, and we need to continue with that maintenance. And our water and sewer improvements will be a focus for 23 and beyond. Cap had brought up the fact that PSAC would make a recommendation to move forward with a $6 million holding tank. What that was I had told the board of a couple of options on the holding tank / main lift station upgrade or total rebuild. And when we got in the complete report, PSAC reviewed that report, looked at the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of both of those, and they felt like that we would be better to move forward with the new rebuild, because it would be, the main reason was with rebuild, when we rebuild, we'll spend a lot of money on something that we get nothing for. We'll be doing a lot of pumping and a lot of hauling, and we don't gain anything from that. But in new system, we wouldn't have the interruption to the homeowners that we'd have, and they feel that the life cycle cost of the new one would be much lower than rebuilding one. And it's much like remodeling a home. You don't know what you're getting into until you get in there. So when we get into an almost 40-year-old, concrete structure and all those pumps and wiring and everything, felt like it'd be the best option to move forward with a new. It wasn't hardly $6 million. It's close enough, but it was like 5.4. But there's not a whole lot of difference there, but 600,000 is a difference. So you'll see us.
That'll come to the board next week.
Yes, sir.
So was that the one we'd originally thought as 3.6 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So within the reserve schedule that we're going to review later, we have it at 3.6, so that'll be a change that we would need to make to that.
Any other questions?
A little bit of a problem, yeah.
Before you go on, could you go back to that water and sewer?
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Okay. Okay, but just so it's clear, we have total reserve pages to come later today. We need to have water and sewer broken out separately so we can see in the total reserves what is the water and sewer reserve balances, because per our licensing agreement with the state, we got to have reserves in water and sewer. And if we throw, everything else is in one bucket, but water and sewer must be a separate account we look at. So I will ignore this chart because it needs to be.
We talked last time.
Yeah, okay.
This is the admin revenue.
Hey, before we move to admin, I had some doc questions, comments. Clayton, you still in the room? Okay. So Karen asked, so we moved in doc for no reason, question mark, and did the infrastructure upgrades in that area take place since we're not planning on adding additional docks?
I'll get it.
Well, just stay there, Clayton, because there's a couple more.
So anyway, the plan before this budget came up and before the economy and what we talked about cutting and cut back and defer and all that stuff came up, the plan was to put a ODOC in Tanasi Basin, where the TVA said we could put it. The plan was to take NDOC, if you've gone down there and looked, instead of running it straight out, we put it at an angle about 20 yards to the east. Yeah, to the east. Put a concrete pad, anchored it in, floated the dock. So it was all part of the plan to give space to put ODOC in, 32 slips. That we've cut out. To give you an idea on docks, 2 years ago we put one in for 188. Last year we put one in for 240 something or 260. And then the one that we were planning here, preliminary, showing over $300,000. So that's how fast things are going up. So we've deferred that. But at the same time, the issue with NDOC was we have boaters that do not pay attention to boating rules and regulations, and they pull up to the no-wake zone at speed and then go to no-wake zone. You have to be no-wake 100 yards away. No big deal to us, but it is the property owners that are sitting over there. So they're out swimming in the afternoon, and we have boaters flying through there to get, part of that was to move that dock, swing it out, to put that no-wake zone at least 100 yards in front of NDOC. And that's why we did it primarily, secondarily to prepare for another dock in the future. And we asked and got board approval to do that because it was cheaper to do it this year than to wait till next year where it had to be done anyway. Did I do that pretty good?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
So then these are mostly just statements, which I think, Pat, what you just said are going to cover these statements. But, so we deferred an amenity that makes money, the only one that makes money, and docks bring additional revenue. I think you just stated why we decided to move those back. And that's it for the docks, Clayton. And then Bob Denny has a question that he heard Pat White observation that the numbers of docks and associated revenues haven't been corrected for at least 5 years. How is that possible, and what is being done to correct it?
Well, let me correct Bob, because what I said could be interpreted as misleading, because every year I find something else. So I start pounding on the inequities and all that, and I'm taking up, I'm their liaison, so I'm taking up for the boaters and the Marine Advisory Committee, and that's my responsibility, and that's what I'm doing. But you'll go to there and you'll say, look, it's generating this much revenue and that much expense. We're putting $250,000 in, and then not just Brad, but it's people on the finance committee say, well, you didn't put parking lots in. Okay, fine, put parking lots in. And then the next year is we didn't put mowing and we didn't put electrical in there. Okay, put mowing and electrical in there. And it's just been going on every single year. And it's got a positive net revenue that people are telling me it's really not that much, Patio. It's actually less. And I keep saying, then show it to me. That's what I mean, Bob. It's something different every year.
And to piggyback, what you're asking for is a fully loaded cost statement to see what the true cash flows are coming from docks.
If you're paying a subsidy, show me. If you're paying positive, show me.
You want a fully loaded statement?
But I can't. and I got a year left, and I'm about to climb on my high horse that Bruce Johnson told me to get off of, and we're gonna. Next year.
All right, we have another comment.
Well, and I just want to comment on that too. The other factor that's taken into consideration is market, right? So, and I know you'll say, and it's got to be comparable, I understand that, but we do have to take that into consideration as well.
Well, and then there's another factor, and I would invite everybody to show up to the Marine Advisory Committee meetings because we discuss all this, but you have empathy to these people. You have 200 people on the waiting list, but you put in a 36 slip doc, now you go down to the 160s. Then you turn over 70 in 2024, now you're down to the 90s, right? And then you turn over 70, now you're into the 20s. That's pretty good. At the same time, we don't want a big, huge waiting list, but we don't want one that's so small that you're having non-revenue paying slips other than, and when I was talking to Bob Denny this week, it's also a good idea, which we talked about this before, to have a few available so when somebody's coming around saying, I want to buy in Tellico Village, I have a boat, do you have a slip? And go, nah, there's a 4-year waiting list. And they go somewhere else. It's always nice to have a few, but not a massive number that we're having to pay excess revenue on or lose revenue.
All right, another comment from Bob. I've heard our entire accounting docs are a mess. Is that corrected, or when will it be corrected prior to defining the 2023 budget?
So is he referring to all the hours, Jessica, you put in straightening up stuff?
Yes,
Okay.
probably.
So are you okay? You finally straightened it up before these two guys got here? Oh, you're going to need to say something because he can't hear you, the question guy. So, yeah?
Yes, so I've been working all year on cleaning everything up from last year, and we still have a little bit of cleanup to do, but we plan to have everything cleaned up by the end of the year.
And you got a clean audit for 2021.
I did.
All right, one more question before we leave Public Works is, has the new Republic Service contract, or what is the status of the Republic Services contract?
As we have stated previously, we have terminated the contract with Republic. Republic has agreed to continue picking up trash for us until we get a contract signed with a new trash service. And so we are at this time talking to the people that returned a RFQ. We had sent out an RFQ to get quotes from people that was interested in their trash service. I met with one this morning before the budget meeting, so we are talking to those, and soon I will be presenting it to the board for them to make a decision who they want to move forward with. Yeah, been several people say that they received their quarterly bill from Republic, which goes through January the 31st. I would suggest that as Mitzi sent out on the help ticket, and it'll be in the telegram, to go ahead and pay that, because it's going to be about 90 days before a new company is up and running anyway. So we're going to be at that end of January time, end of January, 1st of February. So.
Moving on to the administrative sections. So in the assessment, for 2020, moving forward, we see those changes for 22, we're at 153.86. If we increase at a 5% rate to 161.54, at 9.1, if we choose to do that, it generates 167.85 per owner. So with those levels, we have the additional fees and marketing, transfers, cap fees, some rent from the Summit Medical Group, interest on the investments, and some other fees for a total either 5.2 or 15.2 or 15.7 million.
Mickey, before you go on, if you go back and take a look at your, what I'll call your property fees with new home permits, transfer fees, CAF fees, and this relates back to what Chet said earlier about getting close to build-out. You currently have got $739,000 for those kind of fees. You go back to 2022, that number was $1,268,000. So you're losing over $500,000 in straight revenue to the bottom line because of the slowdown in the growth and fees from ACC, et cetera. To give you a little perspective on that, that loss of $529,000, that's basically a 4.2% change in your assessment, because if you take your number of paying lots, which is about 6,800 lots, you're losing about $530,000. That's about $6.53 a month you're losing in revenue from other sources, and that's about a 4.2%. So we're seeing a significant drop in additional revenues because we're getting close to build-out. It's starting to happen.
With the forecasted revenues, we see some increases in the salaries, and that's mostly filling open positions and estimating that we'll fill one position that is still currently open. There's been some changes. So in 2022, there were periods of time where there were empty positions, so 23 is just filling the positions and adding the executive staff that was here. A little bit of an increase in the benefits as again, it's additional staffing that's come in, so those benefit costs are gone up. Overall, we're fairly flat year over year, but the changes in the head count for that will increase.
I have a comment. As I've listened to all this, I'm curious. I know you're approved for certain number of staffing, but are you really looking at what you have to staff, and why aren't you pulling back, and why are we increasing staffing? That's my question.
My answer to that is that's my task as we speak, and I should have the answer to that question before the end of the year. Or my 90 days, depending on how you want to look at it. When I publish it to the board, you'll hear it.
So with all of the expenditures that we anticipate in the year, we'll have a net surplus of either 9.6 or 10.1. In the same venue, we'll add in the depreciation back to the schedules. So from a surplus perspective, we end up with either 9.8 or 10.3 million, depending on which option we take from an increase in strictly just the assessment revenue. Any other questions in the admin section? Quickly, we'll touch on safety. Not a whole lot there. Costs are fairly flat. There's some services that will that will change. Net there is $194,000, and again, adding back depreciation, says that the subsidy that's required for our safety group is about $170,000. Lastly, on our commercial group, so these are the lease payments that come in regards to the units that we have available over there. The expected revenue is $284,000 for this year. There'll be some costs that will be associated with that net surplus of $140,000. And if we choose to make the payment for repaving the parking lot, which is $150,000, it's kind of a break-even year for the commercial group. Correct, I'm sorry. All of the costs that's related to the parking gets included back in the CAF fees that are charged back to the tenants. So we're projecting that we'll take the $150,000 and over a period of 5 years, and based on their square footage and monthly payments, we will recoup that full $150,000 from the existing tenants. So I apologize, there are some edits I need to make. We'll get those done and back out to the group as quickly as we can. Typically from here, we move on to the capital and maintenance reserves. Any other questions before we do that?
One online, it says, what kind of revenue do we get from safety?
There is no revenue. Yeah, no revenue on the safety group. These are just the costs to maintain an active role in making sure that we're safe throughout all the properties.
Go ahead.
Could we go back to the admin slide, please? Down at the bottom, where we have other revenue. Okay. We put in a few years ago the transfer fees to sort of address what Steve has been saying, and that, which is sort of, I think, what Chet's goal is going forward as we reach build-out, that this is sort of a way that you capture, i.e. the investment that all of us have made over the years into putting some cost into new people supposedly coming in. Although the transfer fee is paid by people selling property, not by people buying property. I'm a little confused when we show this reduction from 188,000 down to 108. I know that approximately 50% of the sales on existing homes are transfers to new owners. And I know that Joe and Fred have done a fabulous job in that regard, and Mitzi as well. I guess I'm trying to understand, I can see the permit revenue dropping as we go into 23. But I'm just would think that the transfer fees, yes, there's something on raw land, but that transfer fee is a percent of the selling price, and raw land has been selling for a small amount of money per se, maybe 20,000, 30,000, but a house sale at 400,000, 500,000. So I would anticipate the housing sales will continue to approximate what they have been, because the people that are getting older and selling their homes or downsizing, I don't expect that that would decline dramatically. So I would think that maybe you need to look at that number again. The other thing is cable TV franchise. I remember when Cooper took that back from us a few years ago, I thought at that time that Winston said it was like an $80,000 number that we lost in revenue when Cooper took that back. I don't know if that transfer franchise fee has declined over the years because of the contract. I don't know. And the other thing is, I think we're negotiating right now with AT&T, which would be an additional franchise fee, which hopefully would come in the future. So I would not expect that number to be 48,000, but something different. But I don't have the detailed to really understand what that should or should not be.
Yeah, this is an area I haven't looked into a whole lot, but we will go back through and check those rates. I suspect that the rate probably hasn't changed, but maybe the volume calculation related to that. But I didn't look into the budget detail as to what drove those numbers this time.
And Mickey, we've got Kevin Stevens, our attorney, seeing if there's ways we can increase the transfer fee, because per state law right now, whatever fee you had locked in place, I forget what year it was in history, you could not raise it. So we're looking at creative ways to have a quote-unquote buy-in fee, as we've been talking about, because every homeowner gets about $60,000 of infrastructure on every lot. But as far as these transfer fees, that's a straight function of how many houses we think are going to transfer, and based upon our current recession and current interest rates, it's anticipated the rollover of houses next year will be less than this year.
Yeah. As far as the franchise fees, as you recall, when we negotiated the CCI deal for several years, we have to split it with CCI. So this is half of what it will be.
We have a general question, Mickey. It says, what are the assumptions behind the interest income around $500,000 for 2023 in terms of assumed rate and principal amount?
So we anticipate about 17 million in the reserve funds. And we've talked to Morgan Stanley about options to try to increase the return on those funds, and we'll be meeting with them in the next few days. They reached out and provided a one-year option where we could end up with as much as 4%, but for this calculation, we're assuming a 3% return. So we'll try to maximize that, but that's the assumption. It's a straight 3%, at least for the next 2 or 3 years, and then assuming a slight decline going forward. Questions, thoughts? Sorry.
Slide real quick. Bob Denny says at the top it showed 184,000 in revenue, unless he's mislooking at it. My deck does not have that, but I don't know. I don't see any revenue. Revenue would be at the top there. Yep. All right. There is no revenue there, Bob. Thank you.
So summary of what safety is, I mean, that's volunteer fire department. And what else is in there, Brad?
Okay, so this is the reserve spending summary. And so what we anticipate for 2023 and forward is to us to capture those items that are of a non-operational nature, both from capital and from certain maintenance costs that we know are going to be recurring and are of a material nature, so that we can better plan for the reserves that we would set aside for these funds. So as I mentioned before, we anticipate starting the year with about 17 million. Some of that is from the insurance proceeds on Tenassi. We anticipate getting an additional 2.4 million on those proceeds, which brings us up to the total expectation. Let me unhide my rows here. We do think that we'll get a grant from TDEC. Probably won't happen until 2024, of about 2.1 million to offset the sewer project that Clayton had mentioned. And these are the funds that we anticipate earning that will stay in the reserve fund from this assumption of 3% on the earning balances. From that, we have certain strategic initiatives that were mentioned at the very outset, and we'll try to touch on those for a little bit. And then by each group going forward, we'll try to touch on their group, what the amounts were that they anticipate to spend. We'll let them perhaps speak to those if there's questions, and try to provide some of that information. Just 1 second to get set up here. All right, so we have, again, in this strategic initiatives, there's the replacing of the accounting systems. We have the Kahiti Kitchen, which has been on there for a while, and I think now it's planned to get it in place starting within this year. The Yacht Club elevator is $172,000. And then the major projects and the things that really are putting the hurt on the reserve spending this period, this year, are the Tanasi rebuild, which we think is going to be $4.6 million to get it back to an existing state. And then, right now, we had 3.6, and now, based on what the advisory committee has now recommended, this will now go to 5.4, is that right? Okay. So we'll make that change.
How's that time? What's your timing on that this year versus next, or 23 versus 24?
The majority of it would come in 24.
So $1 million in this year, and then we'll assume everything else in '24?
Yes.
Okay.
And it may, at one time we had 23, 24, 25. Some of it may go into 25. So, but we'll know more once we get into the plan.
But a million you believe is sufficient for next year?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now we'll get into the individual divisional numbers. For administrative, and again, we'll go down the schedule here. There's nothing else remaining in 2023. There's some studio remodeling, some point-of-sale software that we anticipate in '26. And in the out years, there's some IT expenditures that they anticipate. Say what? All of those that we will move down to Public Works. Yeah. So next would be docks. And on docks, there's a few items, or a couple of items, some small things for jet ski replacements and power pedestals. Even though I have corrected my spelling on that.
And just to note, those replacements are the last of the old, smaller slips that have become a safety issue with the longer jet skis. They're at the Tanasi Basin, 5 of them are, where the Tanasi restaurant used to be, that dock, and 1 is at Kahiti. So that is the last 6 that we're going to put in. And then the Marine Advisory Committee also has a process that they get on Craigslist or eBay, I believe it's Craigslist, and then they sell them, and then the money is generated back.
So, a question, the last time I saw this, it was 5 slips for 15, which would be 3 apiece. And now it's 6 for still 15.
Should be 18.
Should it be 18? Okay.
It's 15 for 6.
15 for 6. Okay. So it was wrong the last time.
Right.
So 35,000 is the current spending, and you can see some of the out spending through these years. Some dock expansions that are anticipated beginning in 2025, and there were some changes on, I'm sorry. What was the question?
No, it's just comment, next year is an additional, final additional.
Correct. Correct. I'm sorry. Any questions or thoughts about any of the capital and maintenance spending? You can see out in these out years, there's $416,000 to replace the wave attenuator. Next is food. So Again, nothing expected from capital in 2023. Going into these out years, most of this is just single item purchases, some equipment that has to be periodically upgraded, so you'll see some of these out for several years. There's some carpet changes on the yacht club that were planned over a period of time. Any questions or thoughts about any of the potential spending related to food? Chris, is there anything you wanted to try to bring out in our expected spending for the golf?
I covered 2023 in our presentation earlier. We have some placeholders in out years for more substantial projects that may or may not happen. And if we pursue those, it would probably be a collaborative effort similar to what we did with the Pickleplex on a golf platform.
Out through here, there's some substantial spending, but obviously those are maybe a longer wish list anticipation you'd like to be able to do. For some of these, we need to go through and do the return on investment calculations, because on some of these, there are additional revenues that are going to be generated. And up to this point, I think Chris and his team have some numbers. I haven't had that opportunity to go through them, but we will do so before it gets to any type of a vote before the board. On the park side, just some small amounts that's anticipated. The Kahiti and the Wellness Center have some court resurfacing that needs to be done. A small trail vehicle that's anticipated to help maintain and work on the trails. Going into the out years, there's some additional expending that would be some cardio, and these are periodically there's some changes that have to be upgraded to some of the equipment. There's a yoga studio that was anticipated and that was pushed out. The weight room upgrades and some fitness expansions. And again, we get to the end of this, we'll look at them in total. I know that's it's a lot of information to try to absorb and try to pick up on that. Lastly is our public works, and so this is where most of the capital lies. The Tanasi rebuild is a big number, certainly, and that's a one-time event. But within the public works, there's a lot of elements of the roads, water and sewer that have to be maintained, and will have some substantial impacts to those things. And there's some studies that go along with those, and you can see on the Jacob study, and we've got notes in here about what types of expenditures, and these are matching back up to those studies. Some valve work, you know, they're very heavy on equipment, so periodically they're going to have to renew some of that equipment. I think they do a good job thus far in maintaining them, but there's always going to be a need for replacement of some of that equipment and anticipating that spending. This is the water tank booster for Chota, $500,000 there. Some small items going into 2023. There's some parking that we talked about that could be considered. There's a little bit of an evaluation to look at maybe later this year. And if it proves out, then we would anticipate some monies that are going to be spent on multiple parking lots going into the out years. There was some emergency mediation on some sewer system that's anticipated, and Clayton and his team are ready for that. They're hoping that those funds aren't needed, but it's estimated that there are going to be some expenditures that'll happen this year. Going into this budget process, there was a desire to try to replace all of the water meters with these smart meters. And the original proposal was 2 million, I think it was. And when we started looking at all of the requirements for our budgets and the reserve spending, it just didn't seem like it was going to be feasible this year to try to do that for the entire complex. So I think we've moved back and adjusted it down to finish out what we're currently in the process of doing. And so this is a scaled back version of what some of that estimation was. There's some road work, maintenance studies that have been done. And so you can see there's some 1.19 million as proposed spending for 2023 and quite substantial amounts going forward into the out years. Road work never goes away. Same thing with some of the other types of things, HVAC, looking at each of the systems, what has to be replaced and maintained. There's a fire system replacement at Chota that we want to consider. Some roof repairs, both at the yacht club and at the administrative buildings as well. So with all of these in place, it says that we anticipate spending $7.6 million this year in both capital and ongoing reserve maintenance. So with that, we end up this year slightly even. Again, we started the year with 17 million. Get back up to the top. 17 million. We had the reserve contributions, some insurance proceeds, and the earnings that we anticipate from the funds that we have. Leads us to a point where we end up this year with 19 million. Slightly above based upon the insurance proceeds, but those funds are going to be expended as we start rebuilding Tenasseee, and we'll see some changes in that. So these out periods are we tried to cover all of the eventualities. I think this is really a first cut at what we're going to try to do. There's a lot more work to be considered for this based upon what we had seen in the past, and I think what the board was looking for. It's the right step to start looking at towards these, start setting some targets as to where we're going to end up with our reserve funding. Is there a magic target number? I don't know that there is. We could have some very large expenditures come up on this. We just picked up an additional couple of million on the sewer system that's not allowed for yet in this schedule. But it allows us then to go back and see, and each of these items, as I mentioned before, now becomes a project. And the board will get updates on what the evaluation was, how much we spent, when it was spent, there's a bid process that we try to go through and have for each of these as well. So there's a lot of scrutiny that goes on to these things, and a lot of guidance from all of the advisory committees as well as the board and the expectations from there. Thoughts? Any questions about specific line items or in total? Anything on the philosophy of how we're going to approach this year?
Mickey, you've gone through an awful lot of numbers, and I appreciate how complex this budget process is, and you've given us an awful lot of detail, and I appreciate that. The one thing I'm a little confused about is, on the initial page, I think you show it now as 32.2% increase in the assessment funding.
Yeah, that was an error.
That's an error.
That was an error. We anticipate going into this year with 9.1%.
So that 9.1 is basically built into all of these numbers.
Correct. This number right here actually should be 9.1%.
So if that's 9.1, but then you're showing 5 thereafter.
That's
I
correct.
think what my concern is, and perhaps a lot of other people in this room, is that once you break that 5.0 ceiling that we've all been living with over the year, and then you go to 9.1, and I realize that's the CPI, and I realize what Steve is saying about, have to build the reserves back up. Of course, a reserve amount is subjective. and you can put 10 people in the room, and you'd probably get 10 different answers as to what that should or should not be. And I know the professionals say it might be a certain percentage. We have lived with approximately $3 million as a reserve over 35 years. Now, all of a sudden, and I guess realize the village is getting older, and a lot of these things are now going to have to be replaced, as we're now finding with water and sewer. Some of it due to some changes with the way Loudoun LUB treated us on handling our sewage. My concern is, and I think you're addressing it here somewhat with showing 5% per annum into the future. Now, that locks that in. But I think it would make myself and several other people in this room perhaps feel better if this 9.1 is a one-time only. And I realize inflation, who knows what inflation's going to be in 23, 24. That's the reason we're having an election today. I don't know, but I'd like to not assume that this then gets easier and easier. I've used in some of the comments I've made Connecticut as an example, because I lived in Massachusetts when Connecticut was sold the idea that we're going to install an income tax. It was only going to be 2%. I don't know what the rate is up there right now, 11% or something like that. Once you step into that, i.e. breaking the 5% cap, you now have, in essence, making it easier and easier to just make different assumptions as you move forward through, i.e. a budgeting process. And there's a lot of unknowns out there, and I appreciate where the board is and where the finance committee are. And I'm not going to try and go into each one of those capital spending items. I don't have the background nor knowledge to be able to address those. It's just this one big elephant in the room, so to speak, breaking the 5 to go to 9.1. And all the numbers now I'm seeing, it's a fait accompli that it's going to be 9.1. And yet I've not heard any discussion among the board as to where the individual members are, how they feel about breaking that ceiling, so to speak. And that's just, I think maybe some of the other people have come here to hear that discussion. But now we've sort of, this is the number and we're moving forward. Thank you.
Mickey, maybe time for a little history lesson, so if you'd put up my slide. Okay. Anticipating the question on reserves, I went to the POA website, so all this information is available to all property owners. I went to all the audited statements, and I went to the finance page. So the blue line, I've taken a look from 2000 to September of this year. What was our ending cash balances? And this would be operating cash plus what's in reserves. And I've plotted, those are the blue bars. So as you can see, as Cap said, over the last 20 some odd years, we've kept reserves somewhere between $4 and $3 million until the last couple of years where we said the board were going to build our reserves back up because they're woefully low. The red line are the annual assessment increases per year with the corresponding scale on the right-hand side. And you can see early on in the 2000s, the rate for the increase was 2.5%, 3%, maybe 4%, only hit 5% a couple years. So as you can see, by that practice of maintaining reserves at $4 million, and I might say those reserves were targeted at that value. I don't know what the methodology was. There was never a reserve fund study ever completed. I pushed for it for the last 5 years and finally got the board to approve it last year in 2021. So over all those periods where the rate was, I'll say, artificially kept below 5%, you can see what happened to the reserves. They were never built. You can see what's happened since 2018. We've had 3 years, 2019, for the last 4 years, a 5% increase. And as the board said, we're going to grow reserves. You can see what's happened to those reserves. They've gone from 4 million up to 14, and we're projected those to be at 17 by the end of the year. Now, we've picked up a couple of free falls in there, or windfalls. One is the PPP loan, which is well over $1 million. And then as I stated earlier before, you take a look at all the ACC fees and property transfer fees. all that cash has gone straight to the bottom line the last 3 years with our exponential growth. So, as a history lesson, you can see what's happened to reserves and how there was never a reserve fund study done and how we managed them at 4 million. Now we have a study. We also, for the first time in history, have got an infrastructure study done for our water and sewer systems. We have engineering estimates as to the tens of millions of dollars that need to be plowed back in for our 30-year-old water and sewer system, which, my opinion, should have been reserved for years ago. So when you put that all together, I know, Cap, you said break the ceiling. Well, there is no breaking of the ceiling. What you have is you have a declaration that all property owners receive when they bought their property. It specifies it's the greater of 5% or the change in the CPI June to June. So there is no ceiling breaking. What you had last year, the POA assessment could have gone up, I believe it was 6.2%. But all that was needed for the reserves to grow was 5% as per determined by the POA and the board. So that is the history, just so everybody's dealing with the same facts. We have focused on growing our reserves. We now have a study that's completed which says our target of 9 million was probably woefully understated. But we've been managing to get it up to 14 million due to the fact our property owners have put their cash in. We've got to take a look at what we can do on transfer fees, because when people buy into this place, they're getting a $60,000 investment for free. And we've got our legal beagles looking at it, but that is the situation. That's the facts. That's available on the POA website. But just to get us back grounded on how big should reserves be, we know we got to be putting in 8 to 9 million a year. And you're going to have fluctuations in the balance depending on what you spend. But we've got a hell of a good start on where we need to be.
And let me add here, because so there's a lot of people that are new here, and I feel like I just moved in yesterday, but then I realized I've been here 15 years, so I'm an oldster now. And back in the old days, I hear Rick back there chuckling because he is too. The big complaint, Cap, was, because I knew you back then too, the big complaint was we're subsidizing everything and it's growing more and more and more, and we can't. And that's why. We did not pony up and fund the neighborhood as we should have. We lived on the edge of let's get by, let's subsidize, let's get by, and then you get to the last 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, you see exactly what's going to happen. We did not take that money that we got from those additional fees, that additional income, that PPP loan, and go out and squander it away. It went into the savings account. That's where it's sitting today. That's why it's that high. But if you want to go back to the good old days, like where Cap and I came from, the big complaint then was you're subsidizing everything, we see no end to it. The big thing was the pie chart, right? It's getting bigger and bigger every year. And it was. And you can see why.
There's a question that kind of goes along with that from Joe H. Let me find it here. Is there a spreadsheet that shows the summary of all areas that the subsidies are and how much each area is subsidized?
Yeah, it's one of the slides that was there.
Yeah, it's part of the budget. So you see at the bottom line total of each department what the subsidy level would end up being.
Being the new guy, I need to bring everybody some perspective from the rest of the world that deals in POAs and HOAs. The property that I moved from, their assessments this year are going up 15%. And their reasoning, and again, I was drugged to that party. I did not want to go up that much, but they realized in evaluation of their reserves and what their needs are going to be over the next 10 to 15 years, that they had no choice. Because one of the things that they evaluated was costs. Ain't nothing getting cheaper. And as they project out when they're going to have to buy those things, they have to accept the fact that it will not be at today's costs. It just will not. And so they went ahead and made those decisions. But in agreement with Steve and what Cap's question was, you have a arbitrary ceiling that will never go away because it's in the declaration. Unless we get 71% of the community to vote differently, then it's never going away. So that part none of us, not me as the CEO of the board, nobody has a choice in that. That's the way it is. So we have to be able to manage to that. There may come a day, and I say this all the time, water, sewer, and roads are not sexy. They just aren't. And everybody talks about all the great stuff we put into the golf and to pickleball and how wonderful that is. But if your toilet doesn't flush and you can't get down your road, you could care less about that pickleball. I'm telling you the facts. I mean, that's just real world. And so even though everybody's real excited about the fact we have a cap, there may come a day where that cap costs us. And that's why I wanted to bring up the fact the train is coming. You are going to lose you're going to lose the revenue you gain. And no matter how great we can come up with other costs and that sort of stuff, you're going to lose that revenue of new sites. That's a fact. And the only way we're going to be able to survive that new future is by planning now how we're going to budget, how we're going to maintain our costs, and there will come a time where we're all going to have to agree on we're going to have to live without that. And so far, when I say that out loud, everybody goes, no. But the facts are, that's where we're headed unless we can come up with a better plan. And that's my goal, is to come up with that better plan. But you all need to understand when we all speak in fear and hushed tones about going over that 5%, there's a cap. There is no end to that. In fact, next year, what happens if the CPI is 2.1? I mean, I realize that's kind of an exaggeration. But that's wishful thinking in spades. But all kidding aside, the 5%'s back. There is no other option. So the idea that possibly we could have creep going on here is just not feasible. Your documents definitively resist that theory. And so I want the homeowners to not, it's not so much of trying to quell your fears, but just give you the facts. That can't happen. It's just the way it is. And so as we move forward, if we do take advantage of that 9.1 to help us get our reserves up, that's to your benefit. As much as you may see that as painful, it is to your benefit. And I'm going to give you two real-world examples, and we can go from there. And I apologize for taking up a little time, but I think you need to hear what the rest of the world deals with when it comes to POAs. I was managing a property in Sanibel Island, which all of you just seen on the news and how destroyed it was. Well, I was there right after Wilma. Day 2 of my job, I walked in, and they said, well, we need to look at our roofs. It looked like we had some damage. We need to contact our insurance. So I said, cool, all right, I'll contact the insurance. The insurance politely informed me that their insurance was null and void a week before Wilma hit. It hadn't been paid correctly. So there was no insurance to cover that. So I went back to the board and I said, okay, we're going to have to pay for this out of reserves. I'm sorry, this, before my time, but here we go. Oh, wait. We made the decision 5 years ago not to fund reserves because we'll just pay it out of our pocket. So, $4,500,000 later, $45,500 per homeowner, put it back. At the end of that project, I walked into a meeting exactly like this and said, so, anybody want to talk about reserves? Magically, that was a much better conversation. I tell you this, part of it is tongue-in-cheek, but part of it is real. You can't walk away from your reserves. They are your safety net. I promise you, I hated standing up before that entire community. And in that meeting, every homeowner, only time in my life, every homeowner was at that meeting. And telling them, oh, by the way, that that little problem of no reserves, well, that's going to cost you $41,000 apiece. There's nothing worse than facing homeowners to give that kind of message. And we're fortunate here. We don't live in Hurricane Alley. We don't live in Tornado Alley. We do live in Forest Fire Alley. But if we were to come through and everybody thinks it'll never happen to them, we would be in a really interesting position. Now, we talk about this. There are some rules about reserves that we always want to do, and that is you never want your reserves to get below what your deductible is on all your insurances. Why? Because I never want to come to you and ask for money. You're paying in every month. We should be managing that money as appropriately as we can, and the board does that. So we have to maintain a certain level, and we have to keep purchasing into it. Some people say, well, our reserve study is our savings account. It's not. It's our spending account. Because if we're going to maintain the property, we have to constantly be funding that and spending it. And that's what Steve was getting at when he says you'll look at these reserve balances and they'll be going like this, because some years we're saving, and then we spend it. And then we're saving, and then we spend it. That's how it should be done. That's the appropriate way to handle this. My second story was I went to an association board and I said, look, it seems to me that you are woefully uninsured. And they said, well, we don't want to change that because people will come in and they'll evaluate our property, and then they'll change our property taxes and they'll go up. And I said, well, that's probably true, but have you thought about what happens if you get destroyed? Oh, we've been here 14 years and we've never had a problem. Not kidding, 2 weeks later, Wilma came through, and I was in the building when Wilma came over. It literally destroyed the entire property. This story is a lot worse. Every homeowner after insurance had to pay $100,000 apiece to put their condo back. It's like buying a whole new condo for nothing. So the reason I give you these horror stories, number one, they're true, but number two is to tell you the board is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. I have to tell you, I have no idea how you went 30 years without a reserve study. But I'm happy that you have them, and we'll have one every 3 years if I have anything to say about it. Because why? Costs change all the time. I gave you that example of the fence posts, and that was a week, 2 weeks. So we need to be diligent about managing your money. You'll hear me say this all the time, and it's true. I have one job. That's it, one. And that is to manage your investment. Both your property, all the assessments that you put into it, all the amenities you have, that's my job, is to manage that and grow it for you. And if I'm not doing that, I'm failing at my job. I don't care how good the numbers look. I don't care what money's bringing in. If I'm not increasing the value of your property and maintaining that, I'm failing. So that's the premise of how we've approached all this. I know there's been some discussion about why did we do all these things in secret. We weren't doing it in secret. You don't go to your kids' class and watch them take school, do you? Well, that was what was going on for those 4 days. We were going to school. We were going back through how the budget process should be done. Why is each group having to maintain that? Why are they having to go back and cut costs? Because they needed to. That's our job. What you're seeing today is a combination of an education process, not some secretive process. And obviously by the comments today and the things we've seen, we're going to have to do some more work before Wednesday of next week. And so today, somebody asked me this earlier, is everything written in stone? Obviously not. We're still going through some places. We're still discussing and arguing over what we're going to do. So the only reason I bring all this up is to say homeowners know that the people that you pay to take care of you are really doing their damnedest to do that. And they're spending up nights and they're working really hard at it. This is not a game for us. It's our livelihood. It's what I've chosen to do as a career. It's our career. So please understand that. Please know that we are doing our best effort to make this right.
And I'll expound on that just a little and remind everybody of the process. But he talked about the paid. I want to talk about the unpaid too, because the Finance Committee has put in countless hours on this budget, countless. And so
as a reminder of the process. So what today is basically a review of the budget for the Finance Committee, and then the board sits in it as well. So the culmination of this becomes the recommendation from the Finance Committee to the board in terms of the budget and the associated assessment increase, which will happen next Wednesday at the board meeting. So basically, everybody has an opportunity between now and then to submit any comments, questions, whatever they have on the budget, if you think it will impact or change what the Finance Committee and Chet and his team have put together. But it will be presented and voted on next Wednesday at the board meeting. That's the plan.
And Friday at 9 is the FAC meeting where we'll go through the next turn of all this.
And that's an open meeting.
Yeah, it's over at,
So it's POA
POA.
conference room.
Your normal Friday meeting.
POA
It's the
office.
normal meeting at the
Yeah.
POA office.
But that'll be our last look, and where we'll make the decision on recommendation.
Great. Done.
I've been here since 7:45 this morning. And what I had planned to say and what I'm about to say, probably two very, very different things. I wish that the statement that you had just finished making should have been made at the beginning of this meeting. And the reason I'm saying that, look behind me and tell me how many people are still sitting here. Part of the problem is that you've worked very hard, extremely hard. We've got a major problem. You're working on it. And how many people are still here to listen? That's a problem. And that's part of the problem that I've been trying to campaign on as I pursue a seat on this board, which is probably a little dumb, but I'm going to do it anyway. There is a major problem in how you get the message out. And even with all those chairs that were here, which is far more than there normally is at a board meeting, that message is not being heard. I have an idea about that. I want to talk to Mr. Pillsbury at some point in the next week or two, if we can get together and tell him what my thoughts are. Here's one problem that I do see. When you talk about from 5% to 9%, most people can't think in terms of percentages. It sounds huge. In fact, it really is. From an absolute percentage standpoint, that's an 80% increase. The one thing I have not heard is, what does that 5 to 8% look like in dollars? It's about $6, if my numbers are correct. And a $6 increase at this point in time, in order to build up the reserves where they need to be, is a pretty small amount to pay. And I think there are very, very few homeowners here that would have a problem with that. The reality has to be faced, and there's another reality that you brought up. We're not that far from sunset, where there are no more lots to be built on. One thing I would like to offer, as that you may have already thought about, are the villages in Florida. Every time, and I have verified this by calling the villages and speaking to them. Every time there's a new home, there's a $25,000 assessment that's put on it, paid over a period of 20 years. Let's assume you sell your house after 10 years. What does that new homeowner pay? 10 years. That is one way to help defray costs as far as the infrastructure with respect to sewer and water. That's one idea. I'm sure with a board that as smart as there is here, there's got to be a lot of other creative ways. I don't think for our household that $6 additional a month is going to make a difference. We're not going to feel it at all. And I don't think that most will. And so I think both of these statements that have been made, how do we get that message out so we don't hear, my God, we're going from 5 to 8, we're going to die. And obviously that's not about to happen unless we continue the policies of the past and not do anything. So I'm very thankful that you're here. I'm very thankful that you're here.
Oh, don't say anything bad.
Marty, the check's in the mail. Now, Pat White has been very, very helpful to me and helping me to understand reality. And I'm very grateful for it. And that does not change my mind. I'm going to continue to still try and run for a seat on this board. Okay, I'm not the sharpest sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think it's worthwhile, and I have some thoughts as to how do you get this message out on a regular basis. And Mr. Pillsbury, I hope I can make an appointment to see you within the next week or two and exchange some ideas that I have about how to provide an effective means of getting this message out on a continual basis. Thank you.
That's completely doable. I did want to add a couple things. One of them is that I plan to do, I know Marty does this quarterly, but I am planning, and I'm not sure how I can do it. Beth tries to rein me in all the time. But I'd like to do a video once a month, which I hate this name that they've come up with, but it is what it is. A Chat with Chet. And yeah, see what I'm saying? Jeez. Anyway, to be able to, field questions in a video, and then also I'm finding out that our newsletter in the past has been ghost-written for the CEO, and I am trying to write my own with the grammatical help of that crowd. But those are my two methods of trying to get out the message of what's important to me, what I'm bringing or trying to bring to the community, and to communicate on a consistent level. One of the things I'd love to do, I haven't figured out a way how to physically pull it off, because I am in my past properties that I've managed, I had what was called a monthly town hall, and we would have an open forum. And I would talk about the hot topics of the time, and then I would open the floor for open questions. And I found that to be pretty effective, and I enjoyed it. It was okay. It wasn't a big deal at all. The problem is it's a different thing with 600 homeowners than it is with 6,000 homeowners. And so I'm trying to find a physical way of doing that, and I'm not sure what that is yet, but we're working on it.
Well,
I agree with you in terms of got to get the message out.
You're very, very much in line with my own thinking, and I have some specific ideas which I would like to run past our CEO and see if we can put these two ideas together.
All right, thanks. I guess I just also wanted to point out, Don, you mentioned the specific dollar amounts, and I know that was on one of Mickey's slides. At 9.1%, it was $14 a month, and at 5%, it was $7.760 or something like that. Yeah.
It's $6.30 for that 4.1%.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that was on one of the slides that Mickey presented.
One of the questions is just brought up is, do we feel, Board and Finance Committee, that we will need the additional meeting tomorrow?
I'd like to make the suggestion that we do, even if it doesn't last very long. Because we have made a major change to this process, and we've had a number of people that made it here today, but and I know Bob Denny's still on there, and I told him yesterday, I'm a connoisseur of next door, and it amazes me that Cap Purvis has got 235 comments on his, but we have 43 people in attendance today because I took a roll, and 23 of those are staff or advisory. So there were 20 people here today. 20 people out of 235 posts that would go rather look at social media than to come understand what's going on. So I would suggest, let's do it. Give them an opportunity to voice their opinion. If they couldn't today, just,
Well, so
I'm retired.
along with that, Mickey, do we think we can get the numbers revised? And so we'll have the actual numbers in tomorrow.
We made notes about all the changes, and then we'll get some input from you guys, let you breathe on them, but I anticipate being.
Water and sewer is critical.
All right, I agree with that then. Let's reconvene at 9 tomorrow, and we'll just, whatever time it takes to finish going through this. And if anybody else has any other questions, then we can certainly address them at the time, or comments. Yes, give everybody a chance to look at it. I agree. Cap? Oh, yeah. It's an extension of today's, which is on the schedule. All right. I think we're done then for today, right? Thanks, everybody.